All right, folks, if you are having conversations, I'll ask you to please take those outside into the hallway. We're going to get started. All right, thank you, everyone. So we will reconvene the Mid-Atlantic Council meetings, October meeting, with the joint Mid-Atlantic New England Council Spiny Dogfish Framework, including accountability measures modifications for the 2026-2027 specifications. This is an item for final action. I'll turn it over to Jason Didden. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. I will get right into it. Why is it not letting me go forward here? Okay. Thank you. A few acronyms before we get rolling. They'll be used many times in this: SSC, Scientific and Statistical Committee; OFL, the overfishing level, that's the threshold catch that triggers an overfishing finding; ABC is our acceptable biological catch, that's the upper limit on catches set by the SSC. And then I will alternate a fair bit in this presentation between metric tons and millions of pounds, a few quick handy conversions there. So we're going to do things in slightly reverse order. It seemed to work okay at the committee, so we're going to maintain that. First, go through the specifications, some background information, look at the committee motion, and then the council will take that up. For the other framework alternatives, 1 through 5, we'll go through that same sequence for each one, some background, the committee motions, and then the council. Do that for alternative 1, and then next 2, and so on. So for specs background, I'm going to go through where we are now and a bit of history, talk about the assessment and a data update we got, advisory panel input, SSC recommendations. I think Dr. Rago is online. We'll give a summary of the SSC's findings, and then monitoring committee recommendations before we jump into the committee motions. So the current ABC for spiny dogfish is 7,626 metric tons. It is the 2024 OFL. The council suspended its risk policy for 25 due to concerns about impacts on fishing communities and accepted a 50-50 chance of overfishing for 2025. Normally, the risk policy would have wanted a little bit more certainty, not a lot more certainty, but a little bit, 54% of not overfishing. But the trade-off to achieve that is about 600 metric tons less ABC, and that pretty much directly translates into less quota. So the SSC confirmed the calculations associated with that, but they had a lot of reservations. We kind of went through that last year, and you'll hear about their kind of current reservations about 2026 and 27 later. So the specifications, start with the OFL and the ABC. We take some out for Canada for, we have not been setting a management uncertainty buffer. We don't have, we did have one ACL overage in 23, but we don't have a big history of overages here. As a large set aside for discards, small set aside for recreational landings, and that's 9.3 million pounds. In terms of a little more history for the fishery, I can see the foreign fishery in the 70s. There's a big ramp up in the 90s in this fishery. Both the foreign fishery and the kind of high point of the domestic fishery were around 25,000 metric tons. The original FMP was adopted in 1999 or 2000. It, that we saw the tenfold increase in land and domestic landings from 87 to 96. There were no federal regulations. And so the councils developed this FMP. And the stock assessment at the time said that the stock was overfished. And so there was an initial rebuilding plan. You can see those quotas from 2000 to 2008 were kept very low because we were in a rebuilding plan. And there also was thinking at the time that it's going to take a very long time for the stock to rebuild. It popped up faster, and exactly why that is, whether it was some kind of abundance fluke, an availability fluke in the survey, who knows? But the assessment at the time indicated the biomass was increasing, and the quotas were increased in the late 2000s. Landings kept up with them until 2012. And then landings from 2012 to current have been on a general declining trend, even though there was a good bit of space above in most of those years. So what about the current spiny dogfish assessment? It actually says we're very close to the target. What it thinks is kind of the optimal point, but it also thinks there's lower annual productivity, mostly due to fewer of the biggest females, and not none, but fewer than in the past. And this is like the first, we're still in the first round of projections after this assessment was a new assessment model. It's an actual analytical assessment. Previously, we're, very strongly just queuing off of the survey. This is an actual analytical assessment that's taking in biological information, the information on the length and age structure of catches. So it was a big step forward because it's an actual analytical assessment, not just kind of a fancy kind of bells and whistles on top of a extrapolation directly from the survey. But we're still in the first round of projections after that, after this new assessment. So there's a good bit of uncertainty, but it seems like based on the assessment, it probably would support ABCs around 7,500 metric tons kind of in perpetuity. However, we've seen some big change. We saw that big change even in this assessment from 2000 to 2012 that it thinks was way above the target. And we appear to be near the target now. But that target, there's a lot of uncertainty with that target. The growth information and the age information is very uncertain on the species. So I would not be surprised if in the future we see substantial changes to that target as we get new information. The council's also funded a substantial aging project over the last couple of years that's coming to fruition. There'll be a lot of new age data. There was a workshop, there's a technical paper, a new technical paper on how to age spiny dogfish. They've involved folks from the States, from the West Coast, from Canada, from Europe, to try to nail down aging these fish. And so when we do get a new assessment, we're going to have a lot more aging data going into that assessment. So we'll see what happens then. And again, just kind of reinforcing that the assessment's not saying that there are very few spiny dogfish out there. This is kind of returning to a pet peeve of mine. It's a weird axis here. Normally, that y-axis at the bottom is 0. Here it's not. And it's also in scientific notation, but that bottom axis is actually 300,000 metric tons of biomass. So, we're at, 300 some thousand of females, 400,000 some metric tons of males. So the assessment thinks the total biomass of spiny dogfish out there is over 700,000 metric tons, which is around 1.6 billion pounds of spiny dogfish. So again, it's saying it's like not super productive, but it's not saying there aren't a lot of spiny dogfish out there. It does say that, and kind of queuing in on the right side there. So when that rebuilding plan went in 2000, it dropped the fishery mortality below the threshold, but the current assessment suggests we ramped up the quota and landings too fast. And so kind of, zooming in on that area since 2000, kind of that circle is the same time period as this circle. So initially 2000, it thinks we weren't overfishing, but then the assessment includes both landings, and even though landings didn't achieve the quota, things were ramped up too fast, according to the current assessment. And there is like a robust agreement of a lot of data sources in the assessment that the nature of the spiny dogfish stock changed since the 1980s. And so back in the 80s, all the data sources were telling kind of a similar story, that this is a proportion in these data sources of 90 plus centimeter females. And kind of we saw this decline in the 80s, an increase in the 2000s when that landings were really suppressed by very low quotas, and then again a decline since then when we ramped up landings. And it's pretty consistent across the landings data, the discard data, the survey data, kind of show that same trend. Seatrade around the committee meeting or after the monitoring committee submitted some pictures just flagging that they are seeing large fish. And the assessment sees that too, but it says in the 80s, 3 out of 4 fish were like these 90 plus centimeter fish, while now only about 1 out of 15 fish are like that. And the center took a quick look at some port sampling data and observer data from this year, 2025, and we still see some of those large females in 2025, but most of the fish that are observed in either the port side data or the kept data on observed trips are more in that 70 to 85 centimeter bin. So the assessment is still seeing some large females, just not as many. So we got a data update. 2022 is the terminal year of the assessment. The assessment estimates of biomass stop in 2022. So the data update is not an assessment. We don't have an assessment, but the center still provides us the updated catch information, some survey information. Our next assessment was planned for 2027, but that's now uncertain. The whole assessment schedule is uncertain. So the data update, again, which is not an assessment, does provide some updated data to 2025 for the spring trawl survey and 2024 for the fall trawl survey. Another component we'll talk about later is we also have projections, and we got updated projections. What do we think, what are we estimating is going to happen after the terminal year of the assessment, 2022? Those are also not an assessment, right? That's just kind of, if we assume some typical recruitment happens, we assume the projected catches happen, things generally stay the same. Where do we think the stock is going to go? So the data updated is not an assessment. The updated projections are not an assessment. The only thing that the updated projections really integrate is the catch data in 23 and 24, 2023 and 24 and 25. So what about that data update? So we've got 2 new data points for the large females in the trawl survey. So the orange circle is 2022. That's the last data point that went into the assessment. Everything to the right of the orange circle are just data values, updates that were provided. And so yeah, this is kilograms per toe of mature females. This is the mean length of mature female spiny dogfish. This kind of plays into that issue of why productivity may be reduced, that overall declining trend. Again, not much change there from 2022. There isn't a pup index that goes into the assessment, but it's been kind of a historic practice as a data item. The center provides it. So we've got a couple updates on that also. Again, pretty similar to 2022, but this is not an index that the survey uses, this pup index. It's just an informational data point. Okay, so just kind of refreshing again where we are right now in terms of the quotas for the last few years, relatively low. Landings have been declining, generally not constrained by the quota, except when they start to get close to the quota, the states have to trade quota back and forth with the regions. They're pretty good at that, and I think they've gotten more efficient at the commission of, if there's extra quota in one state, of trading that. It sounds like they've got pretty efficient, but that does create a little bit of kind of transactional friction of trying to balance achieving the total quotas because there's state and regional allocations at the commission. Prices have been nearly static nominally for the last several years, although if you factor in inflation, that creates a bit of a downtrend. Current year fishery performance here is in blue. Last year is that yellow orange. This was through late September. Just a general sense of where the fishery has been occurring recently. You kind of see those hotspots around Cape Cod and then around Delmarva, kind of being the primary landing places in most years, also along Jersey. Okay, fishery performance report. Blanking on the date, but in the last couple of months, we had a meeting of the advisory panel. All the previous AP reports are available on the website. Highlights from that. They noted demand is kind of low but stable. They have ongoing marketing challenges domestically. They're also processing and shipping challenges, whether it's domestically having to ship dogfish up to the processor in Massachusetts, or some of the shipping lines won't ship shark products. So they have a bunch of just kind of processing and shipping challenges. As noted, weather always tends to knock out several weeks of kind of prime Virginia fishing. And a general, this is kind of a sentiment that's been shared rolling for a number of years, that kind of roller coaster style management and resulting short side gentrification really make it hard to keep things sustainable on the business side for industry, and that there's really almost all the dogfish are processed at one processor in Massachusetts, and if they lose that, the fishery will crumble. And they flag, the fishery, while it's not catching its quota, it is restrained in a number of ways. There is a trip limit, and you see a lot of trips right at the trip limit, so it definitely restrains things. There are state regs, there are New England gear time area restrictions, so there's a variety of other regulatory things that constrain the fishery besides just the quota. The AP also reports that they perceive spiny dogfish abundance differently in the assessment. They have a lot of concern about Bigelow performance issues. Does it hit all of its stations? Does it sample at the same time each year? And a lot of concerns about the representativeness that the Bigelow sampling creates. And there have been a number of studies recently that said between how dogfish migrate and where they spend their time in the water column, the dogfish may be available to the survey for a relatively small period of time. So are we seeing real trends in abundance, or are we seeing just changes in availability, given it seems like the spiny dogfish stock may be available to the survey for a relatively kind of small proportion of their annual migration and habits. There's a lot of concern that there's been a major erosion in the dockside sampling that the center or Garfo can have been able to do because of reductions in funding of that and substantial increase in cost per sample. So they have a lot of concern that their catch is not being sampled in a representative fashion. The survey, since there aren't market categories for spiny dogfish, they are able to use the observer data to supplement some of the length characterization of catch. But there's a lot of concern that the landings themselves aren't as well sampled as they used to be, which is true because we have less sampling of them. And overall, industry sees, they see a lot of variability, but they don't perceive the major shifts in abundance that the assessments have over the years. They also have a lot of concern about the discard numbers. We'll touch on that a little bit later. We also got some input at the AP that some folks are concerned that suspending the risk policy is especially concerning given the inherent biological vulnerability of spiny dogfish, slow to mature, long lifespan. The advisory panel also provided some specific recommendations on some of the alternatives that we'll be revisiting in a few minutes. And so I'm going to return to their specific input as we go. So that kind of is our normal process leading up to the SSC meeting, and I'm going to pause there for Paul to give the SSC summary.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. Just want to sound check. Everybody can hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, it's always hard to follow Jason there because he does such a thorough job. I may have some redundancy in my presentation, but I'll try to avoid that as much as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, we had 4 terms of reference, one of which was term of reference 4 was just show your work. What did you use to accomplish this? So I'll be focusing on the first 3 terms of reference. As Jason said, the first term of reference is to determine the level of catch for the overfishing limit and its appropriate coefficient of variations. These projections were not based on an updated model. Instead, what was done is simply updating the recent catches rather than the projected catches and using that as the basis for starting from 2022, but carrying that forward through 2027. The OFL for 2026 is 8,084 metric tons. One of the consequences of this approach is that the uncertainty increases with the length of the projection. That is, we're working from 2022 and we're going 5 years down the road. So as a consequence, the SSC determined that the CV should increase from 100% to 150%. What this means is that there's a slight reduction from what it would be had we used a lower CV. It also means that we are not negating our previous decision to use 100% as the basis for future projections. It's simply to address not only the inherent uncertainty in the assessment, but also the additional uncertainty associated with the longer term projection. As Jason noted, there are some concerns with some of the indices which are near their all-time lows. However, as we'll see, the stock is at a very large overall biomass. We did caution that if the longer periods between assessments become more likely, then the risk to the fishery and the stock will increase. Next slide, please. So taking this process into consideration, there were 3 essential scenarios to be addressed. One was a time varying scenario, as in take the ABC and then subtract it and find out what you have left and revise your ABC such that 2026 and 2027 are different. So we have 7254 in 2026 and 7,410 metric tons in 2027. If you try to balance that risk such that you and also set a constant quota, that turns out to be 7,332 metric tons, and that's the same for both years. So that's the constant 2 lines there. And then the final one was the council directive that it would be suspending its risk policy, therefore allowing catches that take you to the nominal 50% threshold, sort of governed by law, and that is a time varying one where the stock is slightly increasing and would be on the order of 8,084 to 8,202 metric tons. So that's kind of the lay of the land with respect to these things. We'll talk a little bit more about this ABC equals the OFL in the next slide here. So as a matter of principle, setting that ABC equal to the OFL is risky. Simulation studies suggest that lower long-term catches are likely and that the overall risk in this case may exceed 50% given the additional length of this projection period. Now, again, these removals, as Jason indicated, represent a fairly small fraction of the total resource, with 728,000 metric tons of biomass. These are a small fraction of them. What is relevant, though, is that this is a slow-growing population, and as you know, in the stock assessment, the productivity of the resources decreased dramatically in the updated one. We previously had used a natural mortality rate of 9% a year. It dropped to a little over 3% per year. That means they live much longer, spend a lot more time out there, and they are not growing as fast as we thought they were. So the combined effect of those two factors suggests that this stock is not particularly productive. The other factor that is relevant in this discussion is the selectivity pattern of the fishery. The fishery harvests both males and females. However, females are typically larger and provide a higher return. So the consequence of the current composition of the catch is relevant here. It's not saying that you couldn't take more if you had an alternative selectivity pattern. However, they are conditioned on what is the current selectivity pattern and what is economically viable at this point. So that's relevant to this particular discussion. So next slide, please. So we were also asked to characterize the sources of uncertainty as information from the fishermen, the advisory panel, and others have characterized it. There's a lot of uncertainty here. We've already mentioned this issue of the projection performance. We're seeing differences between what we're seeing in terms of the indices underlying it versus what the model estimates to be the current level of abundance. This is a slow-moving beast. The recruitment from the 2015 to 2012, 2015 era is really what's fueling the current level of abundance in the resource. You know, as that year class declines, those sets of year classes decline, we should see some changes over time. However, it takes a while for that process to occur. The environmental factors are obvious effects on distribution. The rapid change in 2006 was undoubtedly driven in part by the magnitude of availability to the resource. So as fishermen have noted, there's differences within the water column and day-night differences and so forth. There is a very heavy reliance on the spring bottom trawl survey. As its timing evolves and changes over years, it does have some consequences for what the estimate of abundance is. So the research track, again, as I mentioned, documented sort of the low productivity, slower growth, lower natural mortality, and importantly, an earlier maturation rate, which, you have smaller females, they tend to have smaller pups. When they start reproducing, they tend to devote less energy to somatic growth and instead are producing gonadal growth that is supporting pup production. So these factors plus the changes in selectivity patterns have all led to this lower estimate of the FMSY proxy, as well as the estimate of MSY, which, as Jason noted, is about 7,500 metric tons. Okay, next slide, please. Again, I mentioned this divergence between the projected OFLs and the fishery independent indices, and sort of the joint effect of not only the slower growth, but also the effect of the recruits coming in from the 2010 to 2015 period. That is, you've got a lot of younger individuals in that size frequency, which will tend to shift the size frequency downward. So that's a consequence you see in a lot of stock assessments with that recruitment effect, shifting the average size downward. So next slide, please. We did receive some very thoughtful public comments. There was an argument that we're missing dogfish in the water column and those day-night differences. The importance of the gillnet mesh restrictions in the mid-Atlantic is reducing the average size of female dogfish landed. We also highlighted sort of the value of increased reporting from harvesters, such as projects that are currently underway with squid. And that would help not only in terms of the biological information, but also give some insights into fine scale movements and size composition. And then finally, a note that that those reductions in fishing mortality after the very strong harvesting in the early 90s, late 90s, and early 2000s, the population did respond quickly to those. So, and I'll conclude with a couple of general comments from the SSC, and those are summarized in pages 5 through 10 of tab 13 in your report. They constitute roughly about a third of the non-boilerplate content of our SSC report. So, but needless to say, and those of you who might sat in on the process, this request to suspend the risk policy for 26 and 27 stimulated a lot of discussion. We felt as a group that this absence of scientific uncertainty was disconcerting and not recommended as a general policy. The estimates that are provided in the previous table basically affirm the correctness of the computation, but are not an SSC endorsement of suspending the risk policy. Obviously, that's outside of our lane, so to speak, but it is a concern that was voiced at the SSC meeting. And then my final slide is that one option that was proposed at the SSC was that one option would be to simply set the 26 and 27 quotas equal, or the OFL, set the ABC to 76, 26, so this buffers somewhat against the increased reliability of the projections, which increased, slightly over that period, and reduces that uncertainty about that long-term projection aspect. And then within our report, we did say, okay, we realized that we're heading somewhat at cross purposes here, and that there would be some value in a direct dialogue with the council on some of these issues. That there are increased uncertainty that affects management decisions and catch specifications for this. I want to thank Joe Cimino, who attended the full meeting during our process there. And if the council does have something equivalent to a Purple Heart Award, I would nominate Joe for receipt of this award for his endurance for 2 full days of SSC meetings. So I'll turn it back to Jason, and we can carry on. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So kind of wrapping up a little bit of that, and also talked to Chris in the last couple of weeks that it seemed like there may be some benefit in simplifying the alternatives that were in the document. Like Paul referenced the annual varying ABCs. They're not a whole lot different. So the document as it's set up right now, it just has 3 constant ABC options for both 26 and 7. One is that average P-star that Paul referenced back here, right? That's the constant standard risk policy result. One is the 2026 projected OFL, 8,084 metric tons. Now, that there was no constant one there or averaging, that's just the 2026, but again, it's 2026 and 2027 are pretty similar there. So just try to keep things simple, suggesting that just considering, again, an alternative, and as we move into the NEPA documentation, that it would just be that 8,084 metric tons. And then the third alternative is that kind of SSC suggested just maintain our current OFL and ABC of 7,626 metric tons into the next 2 years. So that the last row, those percentages are the approximate chance of overfishing associated with those. So the P-star was 46%, Paul mentioned. The OFL by definition is 50%. If you kept it at 84 for 27, it may change a little bit, maybe around 49, maybe around to 50. And then for 25, the catch is about in the same, so about in the middle. So the percentage of overfishing is going to be about in the middle. So it creates like a tidy little range there of 3 kind of eases workload on staff, on council staff, Garfo staff when we get down the road. And I think it captures the intent of with the council. And spoiler alert, that last one was the staff recommendation and the committee recommendation. And we'll get to that eventually. So the Spiny Dogfish Monitoring Committee takes the results of the SSC and the charge and the regulations of the Spiny Dogfish Monitoring Committee to recommend measures to ensure that the specifications will not be exceeded. So this is where we are now. In order not to achieve the overall ABC, there are set-asides for Canadian landings, no management uncertainty buffer, discards, and recreational landings to get to that commercial quota. So those are the things that the monitoring committee weighs in on each year. In the past, you have requested some input from the monitoring committee on the trip limit. That's a key kind of management measure in this fishery. And usually the monitoring committee will kind of push back a little bit on that and saying that's not, we have this quota. How you want to kind of pace the fishery is more of a management practices, how you want the fishery to look like. And we can analyze some things, but the monitoring committee has been hesitant to kind of recommend a particular change, can analyze what we think might happen. But that wasn't really on the table this go around, so we didn't get into the trip limit at all. So, so we have a little kind of a unique situation of several different, we have multiple potential ABCs to deal with. And the monitoring committee kind of decided not to weigh in on that. That's kind of between the council and the SSC, but we can still address all the various components to not exceed whatever you all end up selecting. So the first thing, the Canadian deduction, pretty basic. It's been, the Canadian landings have been dwindling to just from a few thousand metric tons in the early 2000s to just a few metric tons recently. So the monitoring committee agreed that 4 metric tons, which is a recent 4-year average, seemed reasonable. We didn't have, we sought out, but we're not able to obtain a 2024 estimate from Canada. But I didn't get a sense in my communications with them that things had changed. Management uncertainty buffer, again, this is potentially in there to, if landings or discards are higher than targeted, you wouldn't have an ACL overage, but we don't have a history of substantial overages in this fishery, an extensive history. We did have that one overage, and we'll get into that in some detail later. But so there's no particular buffer to recommend there, other than noting if you really want to ensure you don't exceed an ACL, you may want to consider a buffer. So the dead discard set aside, this is kind of the key thing that we spend a lot of time on each year. And the monitoring committee concluded that 3 approaches currently seem reasonable. set aside the recent 5-year average, it's about 3,700 metric tons, apply the ratio. So the projections, the Jason Boucher at the center, when he does his projections, he has to put in something for how much of that projected catch is going to be landed and how much is going to be discarded. So he has to make an analytical decision of what to do so the projections will run. It's just part of running the projections. So as part of that, his conclusion was to take the average ratio in the last 3 years, and that's how he divvied it up in the projections. That's 43.8%. Or use the midpoint. And that's what the council did last year. It took the midpoint of those two. Now, again, it depends what you said as the ABC, but in general, number 2 is a bit lower than number 1. And there's some strengths and weaknesses of these approaches, just to give a sense, of what we've seen for fishing year discards. It's been bumping around between about 3,000 metric tons and 4,500 metric tons. About 1,000 of this is recreational dead discard mortality. Almost all recreationally caught spiny dogfish are discarded. I think it's a 20% discard mortality imposed upon the discards. So about 1,000 metric tons roughly is from the rec side. The rest is commercial. Most of the commercial are trawl discards, maybe 90% plus, I believe. So this has the 2025 what you set aside for this year is that orange dashed line. And then that kind of green dotted line is the 2020 to 2024 average, just so you can kind of see where the estimated discards line up against some, where we are now and a recent average. So again, about 1,000 metric tons from the rec side. Most discards are in commercial trawl, and it's, I think, over 98% of them in the raw data just have no market listed as the reason for discard. The observers, they ask the captains, why are they discarding? The report is no market. There's a 50% discard mortality applied to the trawl discards. I had some conversations with one of our advisors about, there have been a few studies that suggested that may be lower. Those studies were looked at in the last assessment, but because of limitations in those studies that were noted in those studies, the assessment group decided to keep that 50% for the time being, although that was flagged as one of the high priorities for future research to get better information on the discard mortality. Committee Chairman Gwynn asked me, can we get a sense of, and this is table 15 in the framework document now, are these discards unreasonable? Are they reasonable? So we'll start in that kind of bottom middle. In 2023, the dead discard number for trawl fisheries was about 7.5 million pounds. And that's a majority of the dead discards in the commercial fisheries. And so that means that about 15 million pounds went overside, right, overboard. About 15 million pounds was thrown over, half of them die. That's the 7.5 million dead discards. Well, we also have information on numbers of trips. How many trips made up those discards? And so I was like, maybe, well, it's easy enough to calculate what's the average discard per trips, and does that seem reasonable or not? So looking along the top row here, 2023 Gulf of Maine trawl large mess category was 5.6 million pounds over the side. And okay, how about the trips? Trips were 2,756 trips, Gulf of Maine, fishing year 2023. Well, I mean, it's a simple calculation. It's like if there were, if you all went out fishing and there's 20 of you and you caught 40 fish, well, then each of you averaged 2 fish per person. That's all I'm doing here. And the answer is that 2023 pounds discarded Gulf of Maine 2023 trawl large mesh per trip. And that to me doesn't seem particularly unreasonable given input I've had over the years from trawl fishermen about spiny dogfish discards. And when you look at it for these other locations and variations of trawl, so Gulf of Maine small mesh trawl was 1,000 pounds per trip. 2023 Southern New England large mesh trawl 900 pounds per trip. Small mesh Southern New England trawl 300 pounds per trip. 2023 Mid-Atlantic trawl large mesh 1,500 pounds per trip. 2023 Mid-Atlantic small mesh 300 pounds per trip. So like, again, those don't seem super unreasonable to me based on my kind of experience in some of the trawl fisheries over the years. But that's where these numbers are coming from. So I kind of thought based on Sunny's question that this may kind of like help kind of get a sense like, you know, where are these discards coming from and how many spiny dogfish over the side are we seeing on average on these trawl gears in these locations. Okay. So getting to our landings, right? We've got some different ABC options, and that the percentage that Jason used in his projections, since the ABCs are varying, that's going to vary a bit. And so, you know, the 5-year average stays where it is. The ratio varies a bit, and since the midpoint is the average of the two, it varies a bit. You know, not a huge change here in terms of numbers, but it may be impactful for the fishery. So the voting members of the monitoring committee generally preferred the midpoint approach for a few reasons. It seems like it should account for historic trends and recent fishery performance. It substantially dampens the effect of a single year estimate. And since it's, you know, kind of pretty much right in the middle of what we've seen, it should mitigate the chances of substantially exceeding an ACL, and that's the charge of the monitoring committee. Make recommendations so we don't have ACL overages. The non-voting, we have the Spiny Dogfish Monitoring Committee also has 2 non-voting industry members. They preferred that we just kind of leave status quo 2025 deduction, that 3,275. They thought it would represent the recent performance of the fishery. They generally thought that the discard numbers are implausible and concerned about the potential impacts on industry of over setting aside discards, which would lower the quota. And then the last component is the landing set aside, just a 5-year average of rec landings, just updating 1 year. It's a relatively small amount and almost no change from the current. So shifting from the monitoring committee to the staff recommendation. The staff recommendation was to go with that kind of mid ABC to kind of mitigate some of that risk of going all the way up to the OFL. The same Canadian deduction, the slight modification of change to recreational landing set aside, and then use the midpoint approach with the updated data for discards. And that does increase the discard set aside and reduce the quota by about 500,000 pounds. Okay, shifting to the AP members, we saw where things were going, and we said, what are your, this is a range that the council is going to be looking at. What are your recommendations for these? We had one member recommend returning to the risk policy. That would be the lower ABC options. Several members recommended resuspending the risk policy fully and going with the 50% chance of overfishing. That's the highest ABC option. And again, there's a lot of concern about the discard estimates. So staff recommendation, again, that 7,626 metric tons from the SSC is that kind of compromise risk mitigation suggestion, and you end up at about 8.8 million pounds for a quota. And that's the midpoint approach. So we had a committee motion that passed the committee 1001, and it mirrored the staff recommendation. at a commercial quota of 8.8 million pounds. So I'll pause here. Either maybe if you want to do just general questions, but this kind of sets up for the starting point, what the committee came out with.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. That was a lot. And and thank you to Paul too. And just to that end, absolutely no reason to thank me or give any kudos. I'm happy to attend the SSC meetings whenever I can. And if I can, I intend to catch up with you and Brandon on exactly what was missed. And I want to say, Paul, I think you downplayed it a little, but you had 2 slides with concerns from the SSC that I think go beyond spiny dogfish. So I would like to kind of take a minute after we get through dogfish to kind of address those to some extent. Certainly not going to have all the answers, but an important discussion as well. So I agree, Jason. I think between the 2 presentations and a lot of information in what we're looking at here, I'd like to take questions for either Jason or Paul, if that's all right with you, Paul. And we'll go through that with council first, and then I'll even give public a chance for questions. So questions from the council on the presentations. Start with Greg Hughes.
Hey, Jason, real quick, I was just wondering, why are they growing at a slower rate? Is it just the environment or competition with them? Is there any reason for it? Is it the climate, or what would it be, you think?
I think the chief driver of productivity change is not so much slower growth, but the reduction in the large females. So you're getting this less pup production. And they seem like they're maturing maybe a bit earlier. The slower growing ones that were earlier didn't get caught earlier. So now, and again, this is a bit of hypothesizing here, this kind of next step, but we've kind of induced a selection for smaller, slower growing fish because, as Paul said, the nature of the selectivity of the industry. And now we have smaller fish producing less pups per year.
Yeah, that makes a little sense because just over the last few years, we haven't seen the larger ones either, just along the coast where we fished and everything. I mean, obviously, from a recreational standpoint, but we do see the smaller ones as well. So just wondering. Thanks.
Thanks. Other questions? Rich. Oh. Rich, go first, please, and then we'll go to Mike Lucy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Quick question for Jason. Has the size at age changed, or is there just less larger females? Basically, are the females growing slower, or are there just less large females? Does that make sense? Right.
I'm gonna have to check in on that just to make sure I get the answer right. And since the center isn't here, I can't phone a friend there. But I'll yeah, no, I'm not 100% sure, so I'll have to follow up.
Okay, thank you. Mike Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, Jason. I was following along on the plausibility table that you had, and I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly. So but I lost you a little bit along the way. Were you looking for outliers in the catch per trip? Like, what was it that I understand through the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6th column, and then when you have number of trips and average discard per trips, and it calculates down to 13,746. What would have, if something was different there, what were you looking for when you did that extra analysis, and was what you were looking for found?
I think the question was, well, with the 50 million pounds of discards total there, does that mean that the estimate thinks there's like 100,000 pounds discarded on every trip? Something that doesn't seem reasonable. And no, I mean, these average discards per trip in these different areas were, several hundred pounds to several thousand pounds, which, again, I talked to a couple folks just informally. They're like, yeah, it doesn't seem implausible.
Mike, you good? Okay. Other questions from council? Okay. Bobby, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just remembering back to last year where we were discussing dogfish, there was a major concern from the on the shoreside infrastructure aspect on setting the quota too low. And I was just curious if that, I know it didn't magically go away, but are we still really close to the, dangerously close to that threshold of operation that we had last year, or does this buy us a little bit of latitude?
I mean, I think the processor would say that they're in a tenuous situation below 15 million pounds.
Any other questions before I go to the public? Not seeing any hands. So to members of the public, are there any questions on the presentations either by Jason or Paul? Yes, I see one hand. Kevin Wark, go ahead, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin, you might need to hit an unmute button again or something. We can't hear you.
Gotcha. Got it. So great presentation. Thanks, Jason. What I call it. But I think sometimes we're missing, and this fishery is pretty unique. It's a low dollar fishery, high volume. I think we're missing out a lot about, the capability of the processors and who's around and who's going to handle these fish, and, any kind of over precautionary approach in this fishery will really cause severe harm. And, the idea is to try to keep people working. I mean, after a while, these dogfish are never going anywhere. We're always going to have dogfish at some level. And I understand sustainability, right? We need to be thinking about all that. But we also need to be thinking about, people are leaving the fishery, all these fisheries. And we really need to think about stability and giving people a chance. If we're wrong a little bit on spiny dogs, is it really that relevant? And, I did a lot of bruv work offshore in the late months in the winter. And I was really shocked how many dogfish we were coming across when there was no commercial fishing. We don't do well with them when the water gets real cold. And on our bruv cameras, the baited bruvs, all I saw was dogfish everywhere I went.
Can you define what you mean by that, Kevin? That acronym?
Baited remote underwater vehicle. So, everywhere I went to 20, 25 fathoms, all through the winter, right into the spring, there was dogfish. Smaller dogfish, I would say, not, I don't have the data on that, but they look smaller to me on the cameras, thinner, smaller fish. But what I'm getting at is I just think we need to also keep in mind, to have a risk policy that's, it's challenging, right, to keep people in business in a fishery like this. And you all know that, in the mid, landings are going down, values are going down. And so I think we need to just keep that in mind as we move forward. What that means for me, at my age personally, it's not a thing, but I worry about my industry and people coming up and through the ranks, and it's an entry level fishery. And can we keep people working, and can we keep the docks open, and can we keep the processor working? There's something to all that. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but please, when moving forward here, we really need to consider that in this fishery particularly. Again, it's low value, high volume. It means something. Pounds really mean something here. It's not like, the price is pretty much usually set. It is what it is. And I just think about all the years, that I've been in this fishery. This was year 46 for me. There's never not been dogfish. We've seen, some ups and downs, but I do think, they're going to be fine. We're not going to be able to fish them out or beat it back to the Stone Ages. So I'll get off my soapbox, but thanks for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Kevin. I have another hand online. Jim Fletcher, go ahead.
Is there any way to cross-check what's being used as discards from the trawl fishery and the number of trawl trips that are being used in the flounder, whatever fishery? Something does not make sense, but we've got to find a way to check it. And I'm not even going to go on the male fishery because apparently the only person that can do anything about that is the Secretary of Commerce. Thank you for your time. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Oh, I do see another hand from Sea Trades up here. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to write off of Kevin's comments a little bit, just based on industry. And, obviously we've expressed hundreds of times how much the quota affects what we can do, and layoffs we had to do last year, and looks like this year as well, as if this quota keeps dipping. But one thing that stuck out to me that he was talking about is the younger, fishermen and the youth in this. Most of the guys that I talk to are in their 50s and 60s who fish for dogfish, and they're kind of cruising into their retirement now. And when you talk to the younger crowd, they look what's going on and how the quota is dropping, and they see a fight that they just can't win, and they don't even entertain it. So not only are we lowering a quota, but we're also limiting the boats that are going to go fish for them. So sooner or later, the old guards are going to retire, and then we won't have any youth behind it. And if this quota comes back in 5 or 10 years or whatever you all decide, I don't know how many vessels we'll have even fishing for it at that point. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that. That's a really interesting point, that what we do here and now affects a lot of younger fishermen. And when they look at this, kind of all the restrictions with mesh size, quota, it really does affect a much bigger scope on where the industry will be in 5 to 10 years. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely think we're in the realm of comment as much as we are question right now. So with that, I mean, if we're going to shift to comments, I'd like to be able to focus on something. As Jason mentioned, we have a committee motion that's before us. A committee motion doesn't need a second, right? So with that, I think if there aren't any more questions on the presentations, let's take a look and bring that council motion up. And if Sonny, if you want to make that on behalf of the committee, just to read that into the record, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we adopt the staff recommendation for the following table.
Go ahead. Jason, do you want every item on the table read in, or?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. Very good. Okay. So Sonny, if you wouldn't mind, since Jason has the rationale from the committee as the maker of this motion, on behalf of the committee, if you would read those in, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. ABC balances A, the SSC's long-term risk concern with B, impacts on the industry now. 0 uncertainty buffer, reasonably given immediate disruptive impacts. The midpoint discards approach maintains certain continuity with 2025 method, not unreasonably low versus recent estimates. Might expect higher spiny dogfish discards with an increase in summer flounder quota.
Thank you, Sonny. So as mentioned, we have the motion from the committee that does not need a second. We have the rationale from the committee. Any discussion on the motion from council? Okay. Not seeing any discussion from the council. Is there discussion or sorry, yeah, any comments from the public on the motion? Go ahead, Lisa.
I have someone on the phone that wants to make a comment. One moment.
Okay. If you could ask the speaker to identify themselves,
Okay.
please.
You have to identify yourself
Now?
now.
Okay, yeah. My name's Roger Woolahan. I'm a commercial fisherman and a longtime dog fisherman out of West Ocean City. I've gone up and down from New York to Hatteras, but I'm almost always in West Ocean City. And I'd just like to say that I'm supportive of the motion that it increases the quota because we could use every little bit. The quota is so small already. Almost caught it last year without even trying. But then the weather hit. We didn't quite finish it. But last year it was, if a lot of people decided to do it, but anyway, just definitely support.
It was
This would be very helpful for us.
a substitute motion.
Motion.
Okay, yep. Well, thank you. Yep.
So you heard me.
Yes, we heard, we were able to hear you.
Around a while. I've been a long time dog fisherman, and I can speak for the other dog fishermen in West Ocean City. We would be very happy if you would give us some more dogfish. It would definitely help us. Help.
All right.
The quota is so small as it is.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. I am seeing a few other hands right now. So we're staying online. So Janine Gwynn.
Hello, this is Janine Gwynn. I am the Vice President of the Watermen's Association of Worcester County, Maryland. And I just wanted to voice our support as an association for the substitute motion as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Janine. I see, John, I see your hand is up, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask, and Jamie, I'm going to ask for a pause for a second, because I believe something stated in the last two public comments had to do with a substitute motion that doesn't exist yet, at least before the council. So with that, before I take any more public comment, I'm going to come back to the table and ask if there's either further discussion or if there is a substitute motion to come before the council. Sonny Gwynn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry for the interruption and mix up, but yes, I do have a substitute motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sonny. Let's get that in front of us here. If you could read that in again.
Thank you. I move to amend to use the assessment ratio approach for discard set-asides per the following table. And if I can get a second, I'll give you some rationale.
Very good. So I will look for a second. I see a second from Bobby Rule. Go ahead, Sonny, with your rationale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, number one, if it is good enough for the Science Center's projections, then it's good enough for us. The monitoring committee deemed it reasonable. The 2024 dead discards that equal 3,387 metric tons, and the ratio approach is 3,338 metric tons set aside, and it's almost the same as 2024. And this also, it pulls from the 2022 to 2024 and avoids peak COVID impacts. And the monitoring committee said comes down to risk now for the industry or later with overages, and I'm comfortable with that, with minor risk with the increase. And the substitute, also, I had a couple other things here. Is reasonably consistent with the provisions of National Standard 1, preventing overfishing. Is consistent with National Standard 2, management measures based on the best scientific information available. And consistent with National Standard 8, taking into account the importance of a viable spiny dogfish fishery in an effort to minimize adverse economic impacts on the communities that depend on this fishery. Thank you. Sorry for the mix-up.
No, not your fault at all, Sonny. Thank you. And we can certainly consider the first two public comments as support of the substitute that now is before us. Bobby, do you have any additional rationale?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it's consistent with what we did last year. I mean, in the term or in the sense that right now we're kind of using the uncertainty buffer on the industry side, is because we are in a situation where if we don't do something in the short term, then we will lose the infrastructure for it. So I'm fine with being a little riskier on the actual achieving the ACLs and ABCs in order to maintain some semblance of fishery for it. So given that this is going to be probably happening every year for the next couple of years until we get to a stable point, I'm fine with doing it this way. So.
Okay, thank you. I will ask Jason for a little help, since both the original motion and the amended motion reference tables with some pretty small text. If you could give us some of the nuances, please, Jason, on the differences between the amended motion and the original. Maybe something to the effect of methodology, and then the actual difference in numbers as well, please.
Sure. So again, there were kind of three approaches that the monitoring committee deemed reasonable. Either just take a basic 5-year average, that was about 3,700 metric tons, or use this ratio approach that the center used when they have to divvy up landings and discards in those projections. And that ratio comes from the 2022 to 2024 calendar years. The assessment has to use calendar years, and then apply that to whatever the ABC is. And so when you're, we're kind of in this row with the laser pointer for a 7,000, the ABC 7,626 metric tons. Take out the Florida, Canada, you're at 7,622 metric tons. 5-year average is the same all across the board. If you take that ABC 7,622 metric tons and then apply the center's projection ratio approach, 0.438 or 43.8% for discards, you come out with that 3,338 number that is in the table that the amended motion proposes. So again, the monitoring committee kind of preferred the midpoint. It's a bit higher when you, when you consider, this looking at, so it's a little bit higher than the 2025 set aside. It's not quite up to the 2020 to 2024 average. It's like these discards vary by, there's about a 1,500 metric ton range in there. There's not a huge difference between any of these three amounts. And it gets down to, if you have a little more concern to avoid an overage, go with one of these higher reasonable approaches. If not any of the three were deemed reasonable by the monitoring committee, but the monitoring committee's charge is to recommend things that we have like pretty high confidence are going to avoid overages. So that's why it was preferred at the monitoring committee. But again, within the limits of our ability to project out what they're actually going to be, they're all three fairly equivalent and fairly reasonable.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. That's certainly what I was looking for from a response and an explanation. I see Mike Pentney's hand.
Yeah, thanks. Just one follow-up question on the same basic question, but I know in the past years we talked about a model-based approach, and this year we're talking about ratio-based approach. Are they the same thing? The way we were describing in past years?
Yes, and there wasn't like there was never a modeled discard approach. It was what Jason had to use in the projection model to divvy up landings and discards. I think in the previous iteration, he or DeVore may have just used the terminal year ratio. And this go around, they decided a 3-year average was more appropriate. I think probably because of some of the discussions of the monitoring committee over the years of, the issue with just picking a single point year and that variability. He's not with us, so we can't ask him. But I think that's generally why they went with a 3-year versus the last go around. The modeled approach, it was just what they had to use for the projected model, and they used a terminal year ratio. I think this is slightly higher. I think this is a slightly higher ratio than they used the last go around. I have to double check on that, but yeah. So it's the same principle. They have to use something in the projection models, and they chose to use a 3-year average this time. Before they used just a terminal year ratio. This go around they used the 3-year average, the center.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna stay at the table, but I do know there's some hands online from the public as well. Chris Batsavage, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the original committee motion with the higher projected discard estimate. We talked about, and it's in the justification, that with the commercial summer flounder quota increasing the next couple of years, that ought to result in more trawl trips for summer flounder, which will likely result in higher spiny dogfish discards. I think the higher discard estimate will mitigate against the higher discards from other fisheries not targeting dogfish that we expect to occur. That will maybe reduce the risk of accountability measures for the fishery later, which I know we'll be talking more about here soon. I definitely understand, kind of the perilous situation that the industry is in with the low quotas, and there's not a big difference. But I think from kind of the state of the stock and from what the assessments are telling us, I don't expect we're going to be getting really high biomass estimates and high ABCs anytime soon. I think this is the regime we're in. So, not accounting for the discards appropriately, I think it's going to have a pretty negative effect on the directed commercial fishery in the short to midterm. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Other comments from council or questions? I'll go to Joe Grist first, and then Sonny, and Chris, your mic is on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up with Chris's comment, I think this will be aimed this at Jason. Jason, based on what Chris stated and what we discussed at the Monitor Committee about the potential increase in discard estimate for the trawl fishery in the upcoming years because of the change that we're going to see there due to another fishery, when would that, if everything stays the same, but we know that effort's going to go up, when are we going to realize those numbers? When do those come into play? So 2026, when would 2026 come into play in what we're doing, the discard estimate?
Probably 2028 fishing year. 22 and 26 overage would be evaluated in 2027. And then the service, when it's doing their accounting, if they determine there was an overage that had to be repaid, then that would be on the 2028 fishing year, I think. And it's this kind of occurred to me, so that that summer flounder would be one of these kind of rows here in the gears and areas. And I don't have a good sense of where, like the New England, where different New England quotas are headed and things like that. So some, it could be everything's going up. It could be a mix. But yeah, 2028, I think. But does that make sense, Mike, in terms of your ACL accounting that? Okay, thanks.
Joe, you good? And those are fishing years, right, Jason?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Good. Appreciate that. Just keep everyone on same page that this does operate a little differently. So staying at the table, any other discussion points on the amended motion? Sonny, did you have your hand?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can understand this discard with the more trawlers that are going out after flounder. But one thing you got to look at is there's more fish. So when these boats go out, they're going to be catching them quicker. So you can't sit here and really say that, well, we're going to have more discards when actually they might be going out catching their fish a little quicker. And it'll be actually less time out to get the discards.
Okay. Thank you, Sonny. I didn't see any other hands around the table. I do have two hands online, and I'll look also to the public here in the room. If there is anyone that wants to speak to this, please raise your hand. I'm going to go online. I saw John's hand first, and so we did have a couple public comments that I thought we were taking to the main motion, but it sounded like that those originals were to the amended motion. So I just want to put this out there for John and Bill. I'll allow you to speak either to the amended motion or to the main as we do this round of public discussion. So John, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. I'm a member of the monitoring committee and participated in the meeting on September 12th. I support the motion to substitute using the ratio approach. The commercial quota would result in roughly 9.2 million pounds, which is 412,000 pounds higher than the midpoint. I do want to point out that the ratio approach results in a cut to the commercial quota from last year of about 141,000 pounds. And there were two callers that were saying it was an increase, and that's not incorrect. That's incorrect. It is a cut over last year. I have one other point supporting the ratio approach. Jason mentioned that an advisor raised what I'll call a problem of using the 50% dead discard rate for trawl. And I say that because John Mandelman put out a 2006 study that found 29% dead discard. Roger Rulison in 2007 found 17.5. Trawl gear makes up 2/3 or more of dead discards, and having a dead discard rate that's 20% or more higher than it needed to be for the last 20 years resulted in millions of pounds of live fish discards that were counted as dead discards. And I would think that any summer flounder increases in discards of dogfish would fall well within that 20% overcounting. And finally, I would say that in the dogfish meetings, and I participated in all of them, in the last few months, there were 3 points that were raised. And I have this in my notes. I can't point to a document, but the stock is projected to increase the next 10 to 5 years, even if we fish at or over OFL. It's at its target for the next 5 to 10, regardless of small changes to the discard numbers. And as Paul Rego said earlier, the stock has a very large biomass. I'll remind the council there was no ACL overage in 2024, and that's not impacting this quota. So I would urge you to adopt a motion to substitute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to go to Bill Mullis. Billy, it looks like you're still muted on our end.
It looks like he's muted on his end. Bill, I don't know if you scroll on the webinar control panel, you'll see a little unmute button. If you click that, it should unmute you on your end.
All right, Billy, we'll come back to you because I do have another hand from the public. So Chris, I don't know if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a longtime commercial fisherman, 30 years or more. I've been dealing with this. I've been part of this fisheries management for a little while, and I support the assessment rate approach. Because we're always going on hypotheticals against the commercial fishermen. And we're not even asking for much here. It's a small number. To keep a fishery alive and to keep our industry alive. I mean, we've always erred on the side of caution with management as a commercial fisherman myself and a lot of other fishermen. I said, and here we are once again getting kicked down the road with this fishery, just because of uncertainties. And I support that approach, and thank you.
All right, Chris, thank you. I don't see any hands in the room, so I'm going to go back to Bill, see if we're able to get past our technical difficulties, Bill, so you can make a comment. Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't look like you are able to do that yet, but we do have a couple in their hands coming up. So I'll go to Micah.
Yeah, how's it going? This is Micah Folks here. I'm out of West Ocean City, Maryland here. I support the motion to substitute. It's a lot on the discard measures and then and also to practice a lot of the dogfish been pushing outside, coming back up on the outside 20 fathom. Most people don't fish outside 20 fathom for dogfish. So it's either wherever the bait fish are, the dogs are. In the last few years, it seemed like they're either pushed inside or coming back up. They're either outside where we can't get to. And as far as their hook and liners, there's a lot of people using grubs that fishing for catch dogfish all day long. So and also on the sustainable side of the fisheries alone, the environment, the stuff we're going through every day just to keep the dog fishing alive. And it's on the verge. You got Sea Trade, the only buyer who keeps laying people off. And right now, the times of the money to the dollar of what we deal with every day, the windmill project, we had to switch to 5-inch net. They're saying because of the sturgeons. So yeah, they had to kick out another 15 grand. We weren't implemented back into getting regrouping money, but we keep trying to keep it sustained so we can keep moving further with it. But it's on the verge. It could be on the verge of breaking. Even the everything, the cost of living. And far as the dogfish, I mean, I trawled. I've been scalloping. I trawled. And far as the dogfish of the deaths, they don't die as you drag and they're moving on the deck. They don't die in 5 minutes. I can throw them in a barrel, and 3 hours later, I can throw them overboard and he'll swim away. I don't see the death as trawlers being as what it is. So I support the motion to substitute. So, and I appreciate you letting me comment. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Micah. I appreciate that. We will continue to work on the technical difficulties from Mr. Wallace, but I do have a hand from Michelle Duvall, so I'll bring it back to the table for a minute as we work on that. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank everybody for the robust discussion. I guess, you know, this is a really, this is a tough call. I'm sensitive to, you know, what the industry is facing and has been facing for the last couple of years. You know, that said, I also thought that Chris Bat-Savage raised some good points. And, you know, I'm looking at the framework document and specifically, you know, table 14, which, you know, has, you know, what the discard set aside was for from 2019 through 2025 versus what the actual estimate was. And, you know, I only see 1 year in there where the actual estimate of discards was actually less, you know, than what we adopted in the specifications for that set aside. So, I mean, I think some of the comments I've heard about, you know, further examination of the discard mortality rates, you know, given that those are based on some, you know, it sounds like pretty limited research would be, you know, something that I would urge us to prioritize in the future. But I don't, you know, given this history, I just don't think I can support the substitute. And I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. So we are kind of ping-ponging around here between council and the public, but we're trying out a new version of Phone a Friend here at the council meeting. So hopefully we're gonna be able to allow Bill Mullis to comment. So Joe, why don't we give that a try?
All right, Bill, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, everybody. I tried to comment normally, but I can't seem to unmute for some reason. But I'm Bill Mullis, the Dogfish buyer down here in Virginia. And we've been selling to Sea Trade International. And it's just very important that we keep the volume up in the fishery. It's got a huge socioeconomic impact in Virginia. I use a lot of local labor here. I employ about 15 people a day. We move quite a bit of fish. And the sustainability of the fishery as far as recruiting young fishermen is really important, that it's a little bit sustainable, that people look at it and they're, like other fishermen have said, they're a little scared to commit with the quota. They feel like it's a battle, maybe, you know, that they can't win. So that's a little discouraging. So I think it's really important that this fishery maintains a base of some volume. And even as a buyer, if you don't have a lot of fish, it's hardly worth trying to move them. And I heard a lot of people talk about the flounder fishery. I did a lot of flounder fishing over the years. And, you know, when we were really catching a lot of flounder, some tremendous flounder toes that I don't think had any dogfish. So I kind of agree with some of the comments. I don't think the flounder quota increasing will have a big negative impact on discards at all. And there's been some talk about smaller fish, but in Virginia this winter, we bought a large volume of big fish. And we thought it was just a shot of them, but they just kept showing up. So I don't know what other people have seen, but down here we did move quite a bit of big fish. And I think Pierre Juilliard will tell you that. But my comment is I want to back the ratio approach. And hopefully we can work this thing out and everybody can have some volume and we can keep moving and keep fishing. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it as well. I know it still was a little bit hard to hear, but, you know, Mr. Mullis was explaining that he supports the ratio approach and endorses some of the other industry comments that we've heard from the public. And I do see Jamie Dobkin, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to voice that I'm in support of the ratio approach. I have a couple of younger fishermen that are starting out that we're looking forward to, you know, buying boats and getting involved, and dog fishing was something that's kind of a cheap entry fishery that you don't need to go buy some expensive permit to get involved in. And you know, I'd like to see it there for them in the future. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. I don't see any other hands online. I still don't see any in the room from the public. I see some hands around the table though, so I'm going to go to Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to put it out there on the record that as I've thought about this, I've tried to simplify it as much as I can in my mind. And so the way that I see this is that we have different ways of determining what potential discards could be. This is one of the ways that is reasonable based on all of the evaluations, and it basically boils down to risk. How much risk are we willing to take, given the scenario that we're facing, and given the concerns of the industry? At this time, I'm willing to accept that additional risk and plan to support the substitute motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any further discussion around the table? Okay, not seeing any. So with that, I will call the question on the motion to amend. And I think we've had enough discussion to know I'm not going to try this the easy way. So all of those in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hand. Sorry. All those opposed? All right. Any abstentions? Okay, I have 14 in favor, 2 against, no abstentions. If anyone can confirm that for me, we don't have John here for me. Oh, I'm sorry, 3 abstentions. Oh, sorry, 3 opposed, right? Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you. Okay. So I don't know. Is that the count? Jason, can you confirm that or? Very good. So the motion to amend, it passes 14-3, and will become the main now. Okay, thank you. So now we have the main motion to move to use the assessment ratio approach for the discard set-asides, and it would fall into the range that was provided in the table for what was the amended vote. And I'll go with the same question. Is there any further discussion, just to be thorough? And I'm not seeing any. Good. I thought we had a pretty good discussion. So all of those in favor of the main motion, please raise your hand. I'm seeing 15. All of those opposed? Okay. I see 1.
I think we had 1 here and 1 online.
Okay.
Opposed.
And abstentions? Not seeing any. Okay. So the motion passes 15-2 with no abstentions.
Can we just clarify, Michelle, were you supporting or opposing? I couldn't quite tell by your hand going up and down.
I only raised my hand once and it was in support.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
And we're back to 1. Thanks.
Okay. So we have it on the screen, and for the record, this motion passes 15-1 with no abstentions. Jason?
So that will move us to the part 2 of this. Whoops. Okay. Part two are the accountability measure potential modifications, including changes to the payback provisions. So again, we have a stock near its target biomass, but relatively low quota. Currently, any ACL overages are paid back 100%. And the idea when the council kicked off this action was to try to avoid disruption from paybacks that don't appear to be necessary for keeping the stock near its target. And then again, the specs were added in this afterwards. So we did have an overage in the 23 fishing year. The 24 ACL was reduced by about 1.1 million pounds. It wasn't binding to the fishery, but potentially if you're in a situation where it was binding, 1.1 million pounds, potentially has about $242,000 in ex-vessel revenues that potentially could have been lost at that reduction level. And then of course more impacts for support services. Now, even the reduced quota wasn't binding, so that didn't come to be, but the potential was there. So here's a little spoiler kind of summary of all the committee recommendations. We're going to go through each one, but 1B, the committee said go with sliding paybacks from 100% of target biomass having no paybacks to full paybacks at 75% of target biomass. 2 is no action, so say treat all overage sources, whether it's landings or discards, the same. 3A would be always do full paybacks when rebuilding, regardless of stock size. 4B, use a 3-year average to calculate if you even have an overage to pay back potentially in the first place. And then 5A, that specs can set landings closures up to 105% of the quota if biomass is greater than 50% of the target, and do that for 2026. That's to try to address if like one state goes over a bit that other states in the same year aren't disadvantaged. So that's kind of like the complete package of how things would look if the council adopted all of the committee recommendations. I will note in the commission flagged as the committee was working through that there's still the potential for some disconnects between the federal approach and the commission approach. There weren't immediately easy ways to address those. They're not likely to be major, but we'll have to monitor that going forward. So alternative set 1, this is the paybacks and potentially scaling paybacks based on biomass. There are 3 options, and it basically says if biomass is above a certain amount, don't pay it back. If it's below a certain amount, pay it all back. If it's in between, scale it. So this is a diagram that just shows between 1A, 1B, 1C, how if you're above a certain amount of biomass, you wouldn't pay it back. You scale more and more proportion of the overage you'd pay back as biomass goes down, eventually you get to 100% payback. They vary a little bit of when you start paying back and when you reach full payback. So from the AP, one member advised caution given stock vulnerability and having no relaxations if you're not above 100% of your target. Several AP members supported 1A. 1A would be kind of the least cautionary payback scenario. And they said, you've left a lot of fish in the water over the years, and there's no need to pay overages back if you're above 100% of the target. Staff recommended alternative 1B. This is where you don't have to pay back if stock is over 100%, and you scale to more and more proportional paybacks until it's 75% of the target. You're doing full 100% paybacks. So again, trying to attenuate this payback impact on the industry with not affecting the sustainability of the resource. And you wouldn't have paybacks at the current stock size, as Paul noted, is projected to be at 113% of the target currently. So this was the committee motion. I move the committee recommend that the council adopt the staff recommendation 1B. It passed by consensus. The service may have intended to abstain. There were a few technical difficulties. And that would then become a council motion to the same effect. And I just pasted in what that scaling looks like here.
Thank you, Jason. Questions for Jason? Not seeing any, but just questions from the audience on this part? Sonny, Jason has read this in, so I'm not going to ask you to read it in again necessarily, but, if one of you wouldn't mind though, reading in the rationale, Sonny, since this is kind of you on behalf of the committee, if you wouldn't mind reading in the rationale.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will. And thank you for your patience. We only catch 1% of the total biomass, so I support precautionary, but this would avoid unnecessary paybacks, achieving a happy medium. And shifting to 100% paybacks once the stock is only 75% of the target. 1B's approach should ensure negligible stock impacts.
Great, thank you. Again, no need for a second on the motion, so I'm going to look to the council as far as discussion on the motion. Not seeing any hands around the table. Any comments from the public?
Think
Oh,
you may
sorry.
have
Wait, yeah, thank you. I guess I scrolled down too far. Michelle, you had a comment? Sorry.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, I was wondering if you could just quickly highlight for me, how the paybacks work at ASMFC. It's been a little while since I've poked into that, just given the discussion at around the committee about, sort of the tension there.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. We're going to go to Bob Beal.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Michelle, for the question. As a quick reminder, ASMFC takes the overall quota, divides that into a northern region, which is Maine through Connecticut, and then the states from New York through North Carolina each get individual state quotas. And the way the repayments work is that if there's any overage from an individual state or the northern region is paid back at a 1-for-1 ratio in the following fishing year. So if Maryland goes over 10 pounds, Maryland pays back 10 pounds the next year.
Michelle, are you good? Do you need a follow-up?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you so much. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. So I didn't see any other hands from the table, so I was looking to the public if there are any questions on this, or sorry, discussion either on the motion from the committee. Sorry, not seeing hand. I just want to make sure I was scrolled up enough to see hand. Okay, so if there's no further discussion, I'll call on the motion here. The move to adopt staff recommendation. Is there any objection on this item? Not seeing any, we'll consider this a motion approved by consent. Thanks, Jason. We can keep moving on.
Okay, alternative set 2 considered whether there should be different consideration of different overage sources. The no action, currently any and all ACL catch overages are repaid regardless of their source in this FMP. And so that'd be no action. 2A, some of our other FMPs always require, even if there's scaling for like discards, that commercial landings overage are repaid. So at the AP, we had, again, one member advising caution given stock vulnerability, and several members supported no action. Kind of their input was, why punish the directed commercial fishery for having kind of the best data, good landings data? Instead, they would prefer we had better recreational data and better discard data. And they think those are artificially lowering the directed quota. Staff recommended no action here. Staff didn't see a biological or other benefit to treating the more certain landings data more precautionarily, i.e. always paying back landings overages versus the less certain catch estimates like discards, because the more uncertain estimates, They may be lower, but they may also be higher. So there's really not, as long as they're not biased, it's the same impact on the stock over time, right? Sometimes an uncertain estimate is going to be too high, sometimes it's going to be too low. In terms of the impact on the stock, it should be the same as long as the estimates are not chronically biased. So, a high discard, any low discard estimate may be too low, right? So that's why the recommendation was to treat them the same, because the impact on the stock should be the same over time. And the committee motion was to adopt that approach, to treat them the same. It passed 911, and this is just kind of adapting that for the council.
Thanks, Jason. And just curious if you also had rationale from the committee motion. We can.
And I forget, should committee motions just be read in by the chair as kind of part of that process standard?
Yeah, one or the other. So, well, yeah, we'll turn to Sunny. Sunny, if you wouldn't mind reading in the council motion, or sorry, the committee motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Catch sources treated the same for overage paybacks.
Just the top part up there, the motion.
So I move that we adopt status quo, no action for alternative set 2. And the rationale is catch sources treated the same for overages paybacks. Doesn't seem to be a reason to treat more precise catches landings more harshly.
Okay, thank you, Sunny. So we had the motion from committee that doesn't need a second. We had the rationale from the committee read in by the chair. So I will look to the council for discussion on this motion. Mike Pentney.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think alternative set 1 and alternative set 2 are kind of linked in some respects. And I was prepared to support alternative set 1 when we're thinking about the combination of landings and estimated discards. And so in the case where your landings and plus an estimate of discards exceed the ACL, I think it's reasonable to potentially scale that ACL payback based on the stock status, which is what we did in alternative set 1. But I'm much more concerned here where we're saying that a known landings overage would not be accounted for. And I think that, we have to recognize that, the circumstance where an ACL overage appears to have occurred, but it wasn't because of landing, it was because of an increased estimate of discards. We might forgive that because the estimate has, it's an estimate, and we recognize there's some error in that. But when we know that the landings exceeded the quota, I think, it's incumbent on us to account for that moving forward. And I think, almost every other fishery that I can think of managed by this council that has a landings quota, when the landings are exceeded, there's a payback, pound for pound payback of a landings overage. And how we treat discards added on to those landings to determine whether an ACL overage occurred and whether an additional payback is necessary, I think is a different question. So, I have a lot of concern with this approach. I think, to be consistent with the rest of the FMPs, be consistent with the way we are trying to manage the spiny dogfish fishery by creating a landings quota, we should be holding the fishery accountable for an overage of that quota.
Thank you, Mike. Further comments from the council? Not seeing any comment. Are there any comments from the public on this item? Okay, I'm not seeing any, Jason, so I'm gonna call the question on the committee's motion. And I will look for a show of hands. So all of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Okay, I see 12. All of those opposed, please. I see 5. Any abstentions? Oh, sorry, 6. Thanks, Chris. Not seeing any abstentions. So I have 12 to 6. Yep, thank you, Jason. So the committee motion, with no abstentions, the committee motion passes 12 in favor, 6 opposed. All right, Jason, I think we'll keep moving on.
Alternative set 3 is, again, should there be a special case when the stock is in a rebuilding plan? The no action would be that there's no difference if it is or not. 3A, the action would be to always pay back ACL overages fully if the stock is in a rebuilding plan, regardless of its stock status. Because I could have a stock at 50, 40%, 99% of your target, et cetera. So there's a variability there, but you still pay it back to try to help achieve the rebuilding goal. So one AP member advised caution to not relax if not fully rebuilt. Several AP members supported the no action, just go with the stock size and don't have a special case where you don't use the scaling provisions to mitigate paybacks. Staff recommended 3A to always pay back ACL overages fully if a stock is in a rebuilding plan. The National Standard 1 guidelines say that not fully paying back catch overages during a rebuilding plan would likely involve some developing complicated analysis. The basic National Standard 1 says if you're in a rebuilding plan, there's a general expectation that the overages would always be repaid. And there are some potential exemptions to that, because you can imagine like a stock not in a rebuilding plan headed downward at like 60%. Is probably in more trouble than a stock headed upward in a rebuilding plan at 90%. So you can almost say, but again, these are the kind of complicated analyses you'd have to deal with, and it's not really relevant. So at this time, it could be revisited in the future. So the committee motion was to recommend that the councils adopt alternative 3A. It passed by consent. And then the top there would be the council motion from the committee.
Okay, so we'll thank you, Jason. We'll stay with how we've been doing this. So we'll look to Sunny as chair of the committee to both read that top line motion in, and then as we'll scroll over to the rationale if there is any. Thank you. Go ahead, Sunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we adopt alternative 3A. Always. Thank you. National Standard 1 advises that full paybacks would generally be expected during rebuilding. Not currently pertinent, so simplest to align with the basic national standards guidance. Revisit later if needed.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a motion from the committee looking to the council. Discussion on the motion? Not seeing any hands. I'll look to the public. Discussion on the motion. Okay, not seeing any again, so I will call the question. And I will ask, is there any objection to the motion coming out of committee? Seeing none, Jason will consider this passed by consent. Back to you.
Okay, alternative set 4 considers whether or not averages of catches and average of ACLs should be used to determine if there's an overage in the first place. So 4A was use a 3-year average to calculate the overages. I think we do this in some other FMPs. And a 3-year biomass to decide where you are in that scaling. 4B is the same thing, except just says just use the most recent projected biomass in that scaling. So there's several members supported, AP members supported 4B to use that 3-year average, but just use the most recent year to determine how you scale the paybacks based on biomass. Staff also recommend 4B. As a large overall biomass and long lifespan, so smoothing ACL to catch comparisons over 3 years should add to stability of the industry without really affecting the stock. I think that the averaging of the biomasses probably would also be technically okay. You know, there's some tensions. Normally you think the most recent is the best available. Well, it's the most recent available, but our terminal year biomasses talked about with mackerel are often the most uncertain. So there could be theoretically some benefit of averaging that also. But for spiny dogfish, it shouldn't change that much year to year with the stock. And so to keep things simple, the average was just use the most recent projected biomass. The motion from the committee was along those lines also that yes, 4B, the averaging approach, just using the most recent biomass to determine scaling. If it's combined with the scaling, it passed by consent. And again, this would be the council motion. And again, Sunny, I just added in the parentheses is not part of the motion. I just added it in there for like people online. So, and then after that gets read in, I do have a summary of the committee the committee rationale on the next page, like before. Thanks.
Yep, thank you, Jason. So Sunny, if you wouldn't mind reading that top line, and then we'll move to Ed also reading in the.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we adopt 4B for the averaging alternative. There are trade-offs in terms of uncertainty using the most recent and potentially more uncertain terminal estimate versus a recent average. For a stock like spiny dogfish, long-lived, it shouldn't matter too much either way, and 4B would be the simplest and could be more responsive to the most recent trends.
Thank you, Sunny. So we have a motion before us. I'm going to look to the council for questions for Jason on this, or we'll go right into comments as well on the motion. So I already have one hand, Mike Penny.
Yeah, not a question. So I think I'm going to oppose this as well. I think this is one, and I'll have the same comment on the next action. Given the vote to not treat landings overages separate from overall ACL overages, I can't support this motion. I can't support averaging 3 years worth of known landings overages before we make a decision about whether there's a payback. If this was, if we were only talking about overages of the ACL based on, the uncertain discard estimates, I think this would be something I could support. But given the vote on the previous action, I can't support this.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Other hands from council? Okay, not seeing any. Any members of the public that would like to comment on this motion? Not seeing any. So I will call the question here. I'm gonna ask. We know of one known objection, but if that's the only, so I'm gonna ask: are there any objections to the motion by show of hands from council members, please? Okay, thank you, Mike. So with that, Jason, I only see one objection to the motion, so we'll consider this passed with the one objection from Garfo. Thank you. Back to you.
This presentation has exactly 100 slides, so we're coming down the home stretch. Okay, alternative set 5. The closure at 105% of the quota question. So right now, no action, closures occur at 100%. The potential issue is when federal waters close 100%, if some states had exceeded their quota, then other states that fish later in the year may be shut down early before they approach their own state quota. So closing at 105% is designed to try to ensure kind of consistent access across all the states. So again, I think we have a similar provision with black sea bass in another council FMP. And so these are contingent upon different levels of biomass. And there was some discussion at the committee of if that could be kind of dispensed with the biomass provisions, but staff and NIMS recommended, since this contingency had been in there kind of from the start of these alternatives, that not be jettisoned. So several AP members supported 5A, allowing that kind of closure plus buffer, and as being most flexible. Staff recommended 5B, allowing it when the biomass is projected to be at least 75% of the biomass target. And again, because you could have some minor quota overages, theoretically they contribute to an ACL overage. And that seems kind of like a risk that would be more appropriate when the stock is in better stock status. The committee motion was to recommend 5A and set the 5% buffer for the 26 to 27 specifications. It passed 10-1-0. This is council motion. Again, 5A is the one that only has plus 50% of biomass contingency with this buffering.
Okay, thanks. And assuming there's also rationale to come, then okay. Sonny, we'll look to you to continue this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we adopt 5A and set a 5% buffer for the 2026, 2027 specifications. This helps avoid a situation where one state's overage disadvantages other states within a year. There was discussion if the biomass trigger could be removed, but given it has been part of the discussion to date, staff recommended and National Marine Fisheries Service supported not making such a change at this time.
Great, thank you. So as we've done before, I'll look to the council for either discussion on the motion, or if you do have questions, we can get to them right now. So look for hands on this. Mike Pentney.
So as I noted on the previous motion, I'm going to oppose this. I think I could have found this, supportable if we hadn't adopted the prior motion, as I said, that doesn't, incur accountability for a landings overage. This would be saying that every year we're going to allow the fishery to catch 105% of the landings quota and not incur any penalty or any payback. If that was the case, then we would just set the landings quota higher. So I don't really see how this makes any sense if we're not gonna have a payback of the landings overage. There's also a difference, I think, in black sea bass. We adopted the 5% buffer because of the state-by-state allocation issue, but notably because some states have an IFQ for black sea bass. And so there was a significant concern among the state, some of the states that they could have IFQ holders with quota remaining available to them, but the EEZ would be closed because the total quota was reached. And I think that accommodation for black sea bass, because of the IFQ aspect of it, made a lot of sense. I don't think we don't have that same situation with dogfish, but in light of the previous motion on landings accountability, I can't support this.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mike spoke to something that I was going to ask about. But so for the black sea bass, 5% buffer, there is no biomass threshold. Is there, am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, that's correct. But there is a payback. So if they, if we reach 104% of the black sea bass quota, we don't close it coast-wide, knowing that the commission is managing the state allocations and the state landings, but we do incur a payback of that 4% overage coast-wide.
Thanks for that clarification. I guess, again, this is sort of where the tension between, this action and the ASMFC paybacks comes in, I guess. So thank you.
Okay, thank you both for that. That was an important question, Michelle. Any other comments or questions from the council? Not seeing any hands, so I'll look to the public. Are there any comments or questions on this motion? Okay. Not seeing any. Again, I'll call the question. Is there any objection to the motion before the council? I see one hand. Garfo is objecting, so Jason will consider it approved with one objection. And you promised we're getting closer, right?
You guys saw 100 slides.
Somehow I inadvertently, over the course of the presentation, added another slide, but we are now on the last slide. So that does it for all the alternatives. Thinking back over some of the discussion and the services concerns on the landings overage versus some of the other alternatives, if the service was gonna partially approve the action and it was deciding which to partially disapprove, that landings provision, my initial thought of advice to the council would be, I think it'd be a bigger effect to have the averaging provision in there than the non-landings overage payback. So, I mean, if the service was eventually in a bind where it was potentially where it was potentially thinking of disapproving, one of the alternatives in an action, would it come to the council to solicit some input on, we can't do all of these, but to make it logical and rational, there's one of these that we could disapprove. Would the service have that discussion with the council? Because that averaging one would probably have a lot more beneficial impact to the industry, to industry and stability than the landings one. The landings overages are probably likely to be relatively small. So would you all, if you all got in that bind, would you have that discussion with the council? Would you be able to?
Well, that was a direct question there to the RA, so Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how this package is prepared. Right now I'm seeing a package, and the reason I'm opposing the later motions is because they seem to all hinge on the first motion that I opposed. So, at this point, I can't say whether we would disapprove the entire framework adjustment or approve the first action on the scaled paybacks for an ACL overage and disapprove everything else. It would depend on whether the analysis suggests that all of these alternatives are in fact severable and could be, approved or disapproved independently. But I haven't really had time to think that through yet and talk with staff. So I don't think, Jason, I can directly answer your question at this point.
Okay, Jason, I don't know if you had a follow-up.
Yeah, I think it can be constructed that they would be severable. If that was not the case, I was potentially kind of on the fly advising reconsideration of that motion. But if they can be constructed, because I think it would be really unfortunate for the whole thing to kind of go down because of that, because that is a relatively minor impact on stability of the fishery. First, like the 3-year averaging to average out some of those bouncing around discard estimates probably has a lot more effect. But I think council staff can make it clear that it could be severable in the document and not like is not so tied together to everything just in case. So I think I'm okay.
Okay, good. I appreciate that. You've been doing this a long time. We have 2 councils and a commission that need to worry about this. Oddly enough, for a few more weeks, I can speak on behalf of the chairman of the commission as well. That we certainly we've done out of lockstep before, and that's no way to go. So I think even the commission as well as New England Council will be waiting to see how this progresses to make sure that we all do stay in lockstep. So I appreciate the question, Jason. It does look like some of this will have to be, to be determined on exactly where it goes. But Mike, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just sort of a procedural comment, just because I want to make sure everybody around the table is has all the information. So unlike specifications for Dogfish, where the New England Council and the Mid-Atlantic Council can generate different results. That has happened. It's rare, but it has happened. And the regulations specifically say if the 2 councils don't agree on a proposed specification, then the agency can select something that has not been rejected by both councils. But this is a framework adjustment that's effectively changing the FMP and changing the regulations. So under the Magnuson Act, both councils have to adopt the exact same set of alternatives in order for the framework adjustment to move forward. So it won't move forward if the New England Council picks different preferred alternatives. It'll come back to the Mid-Atlantic Council. And so I think before you vote on this last motion, just, be aware that at the December New England Council meeting, I'm going to voice the same concerns about the landings overage payback issue. And then if the New England Council adopts a different alternative for that, or different, alternative for that alternative set, then the framework will come back to you in February.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Very important discussion there. I see Chris Batsavage his hand.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. It's two questions. It's first one to Mike Pentney. If this does come back to the council, our council next February, what kind of delay would that result in implementing this framework, and how would that impact the fishing years in question? And I guess the second one, maybe to Jason, since there's a little bit of uncertainty surrounding what we selected in one of the earlier issues, would it make sense for someone to make a motion to reconsider for that particular issue that seems to be isn't going to pass, and see if we can get that cleaned up now and not have to worry about potentially delaying this action by having to look at it again next February. So two separate questions to two different people, and just trying to figure out if there's maybe a way we can resolve this today instead of kind of the looming uncertainty over the next several months.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks to Chris. To your first question about the timing, I think I believe it's correct that this is considered one package, right? That would be the framework that includes the proposed specifications for next year. So any delay in final action of both councils would delay rulemaking for the 2026 specifications.
Jason.
Since they're not changing very much, that probably wouldn't have much of an impact. And since there was no overage in 24, we're not looking at a payback in 26. So there's not a critical timing issue here. But again, also just workload. The landings overage component has a small effect compared to the overall scaling. If the council, again, so it's a bit of unknown of what NIMS is going to do. I kind of stand by from a biological perspective. I don't think it really is a different issue, other than where we have some more precision on it. But if the council wants to avoid that potential, you do have that option of reconsidering that landings alternative.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we are looking at a couple different paths forward here. But I am seeing, I think, a few hands. So I'm going to go to Jim Gilmore, and then I'll look around for other hands as well.
Thanks, Chairman. So, Mike, so I got confused here. So essentially, if it goes to New England, they come up with a different spec, it's going to come back to us. And then at that point, what if we don't agree with that spec? Then does it go back to them, or does at some point does it go to you to finally reconcile this?
So no, sorry, just clarify. So the specifications aspect that we just voted on in terms of the overall ABC, the discard estimate, and the landings quota, the two councils don't have to agree on that. If the two councils come up with a different recommendation, let's say the New England Council didn't like the ratio approach for discards and went with a different discard estimate, that would be okay. And the specifications, if it was a standalone specs package, would come to us, and we would make a determination, probably in light of considering also what the commission might have done, to pick one or the other to implement. But the framework adjustment aspects of this, changing the scaling, changing whether when there's paybacks, those have to be agreed identically by both councils. And if it came back to the Mid-Atlantic Council in February and the Mid-Atlantic Council couldn't agree with what the New England Council put forward, the framework dies effectively. It doesn't go anywhere until both councils agree on the identical set of measures.
Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanting to be risk averse today and not have any risk to this fishery. Can we go back to the alternative in question and kind of go back through that again? Because I'm hearing some risks here that I don't think are going to be acceptable for the industry for us to put them in if we can't come to some agreement.
Yeah, it looks like Jason's looking for that now.
So it was alternative set 2. I think it would need a motion from someone on the winning side to reconsider. Is that Robert's rules consistent? I seem to recall. And again, so this was, philosophically, from the biology perspective, a high discard estimate is uncertain, but it could be even higher than was estimated, and the impact could be even be worse. So that's why kind of maybe staff got kind of took this position. But landings overages are likely to be small, and it's probably not worth jeopardizing the entire action. And it could be revisited in the future if it somehow becomes an issue. So I think you'd need a motion to reconsider alternative set 2.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I don't know if anyone is, I think there is some interest from the prevailing side to reconsider. I don't know if anyone's ready. I see Chris Bat-Savage's hand, maybe.
Sure. I need probably some help crafting the motion. Never had to do a motion to reconsider. No, once every 13 years, whether I need to or not, right? So I guess a motion to reconsider, move to reconsider alternative set 2. I'm not sure what else would be needed. I'll just let it get written. I'll read it again.
So I do think, so we're having a discussion here. The motion to reconsider would be its own, and then a separate motion for what
The original motion then comes back on.
right. Yeah. So we'll bring the original motion back and then.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So I move to reconsider alternative set 2.
Okay, there's Chris. We have a second from Joe Grist. Okay. I think we've had a pretty good discussion on the rationale. Yep, go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can you clarify? I believe you would need a 2/3 majority for this particular motion to reconsider. I think we should all be clear as to what the need is before we take the vote. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's fair. I don't have it on my cheat sheet, but I was asking the same question. Yeah, I'm seeing some head nods. So thank you, Mike. Yes, we since this was passed and the motion to reconsider is from the prevailing side, but it would take a 2/3 majority. Just this motion, Jim? Sure. Yep, I will reread this in. So it's a motion to reconsider alternative set 2, made by Chris Bat-Savage and seconded by Joe Grist. So discussion on the motion to reconsider? I'm not seeing any hands from the council, but I guess oh, sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. So it seems to me that this is the thing that intersects the most with, the ASMFC payback provisions. And I'm wondering if those payback provisions would, alleviate the concern that Mr. Pentney has expressed. I don't know. I just raised that. It seems to be this alternative set is where those two things intersect. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So we have some comment here. I'm not, any other hands? Okay. Not seeing any from the table, so I will give the public a chance to comment, I guess. Lori, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so your guys are going to reconsider now because of the fear that there'll be a disconnect after this gets presented to New England, that New England is going to pick a different alternative because Mike is disapproving it. And I just don't think necessarily that if everybody believed in the first choice, I'm not betting that New England won't do exactly what we did. And this is no disrespect to Mike, but I just feel like you went down this road trying to give a little more to the industry. And I don't think that's not New England's MO and wouldn't be the way they went. And if we have specifications that are going to roll over, if this framework is to be rejected, the industry will still go to work. The difference is the 400,000 pounds. And then we try round 2 on the framework. I'm not looking to see any more work have to go into all this and time. I understand the sensitivity there. I just don't think we should bet that New England isn't going to make the same choices that this council just made today. It may be rejected after it gets submitted. Certain parts can be rejected, but we'll still have a specification package and any of the other alternatives that were approved that Mike also supported. I'm just not betting New England's not going to go the same way, I guess. And on that, why not stand your ground sort of for the reasons that were all deliberated and say, let's see what happens after New England looks at this. And maybe we will all end up on the same page after all. It may not pass, but it doesn't come back to us because New England's on the same page.
Okay, thank you, Lori. I appreciate those comments. So with that, and with the point of order call that we need 2/3 here, and unless there's any other discussion items, I'm going to call the question on the motion to reconsider. Okay, not seeing any other hands, I'm gonna call the question. All of those in favor of the motion to reconsider alternative set 2, please raise your hands. I see 3 in the room. Is that right? 3 in the room, none online. So all of those opposed? I see 13. Any abstentions? Okay. So, yep, Jason, that's the count I have. 3 to 13 with no abstentions. So the motion fails. And we're back to the motion to submit the Spiny Dogfish Framework to National Marine Fisheries Service pending a matching action from the New England Fishery Management Council. So just quickly, any further discussion on the motion to submit? Laura, you have a question? Go ahead.
I do. Mike, if this comes forward to you and New England and the MID are on the same page, parts of the alternatives to modify accountability measures can be rejected, but it doesn't make the whole framework fail, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's the piece that Jason asked. And I mean, theoretically, that's true. But I would want to talk, I want to talk with my staff, talk with general counsel, and look at the document once it's submitted in terms of how do these pieces all fit together? Are they completely independent and severable, or are they interrelated in terms of a package of accountability measures to satisfy Magnuson Act? To the extent that they're a package of measures that work together, one could cause all of them to be disapproved. If we are able to determine that these are in fact all independent and severable, then we could potentially disapprove 1 or 2 and leave the others intact. But all of that remains to be seen, following the New England Council's final action and a review of the document. And when I have the benefit of my staff and general counsel and others to go over these issues with.
but the specifications are not going to be looked at over there and these accountability measures over here. If you reject anything, the whole thing fails, or do the specifications stand? Because that is separate. Specifications are specs, accountability measures are accountability measures, right?
True, but it's a single framework adjustment that's being submitted as a single package that includes specifications and adjustments to the accountability measures. Now, what we're not going to see is a situation where we just disapprove the entire framework out of hand because of one or two accountability measures provisions. So a partial approval might be we're approving and implementing all of the specs, but we're not approving or implementing any of the changes to the accountability measures. Or we're approving and implementing the specs and some of the changes to the accountability measures.
Okay, important clarifications. Thank you there. So I think we've had plenty of discussion here. So I'm going to call the question on.
We need a motion first.
Oh, sorry, Jason. I thought I read it in without having a vote on it here. So, excuse me. So is anyone willing then to make the motion to submit? Sunny, I see your hand. Second. Joe Grist. Okay. Sunny, I think we've had a pretty robust discussion. Are you good with that?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Grist? All right, very good. So, Jason, once again, just since we had some discussion, I'll read it in, and it's a move to substitute the Spiny Dogfish framework.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
You said substitute.
Oh, geez. Okay. Wow. Sorry, everybody. Yes. I'm going to start over again. Sorry, everyone. Wow. Move to submit the Spiny Dogfish framework to National Marine Fisheries Service pending a matching action at the New England Fishery Management Council. Is there any objection to the motion by council members? Any abstentions? One abstention from Garfo. So this motion passes by consent with one abstention. All right, I appreciate that. Jason, does that wrap us up here?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Bob Beal.
Yeah, just briefly, I didn't want to say anything prior to the framework being wrapped up, but depending on what is approved coming out of NOAA Fisheries, there are some potential accountability scenarios where ASMSC and the council aren't in lockstep exactly. And the biggest one I think we need to guard against is making sure an overage isn't sort of double counted. In other words, taken off the top at NOAA, and then that lower quota is distributed to the states through ASMSC, and then that state's overage through the ASMSC process gets taken off. And so I think we can guard against that, but we just have to, be on the lookout for it. And the other thing that may complicate this is ASMSC has a provision where if the full quota isn't utilized, up to 5% of that unused quota can be rolled over into the next year, which has the ability to, again, kind of throw things out of whack a little bit. These are all most likely really small percentages and we could work them out, but I think we just have to, make sure the math makes sense to everyone and that we're not penalizing the industry negatively because we're out of lockstep a little bit. So we'll just have to, we can't fix it here. We may be able to fix some of it through the commission's plan, but I think step one is seeing what is finally, what New England Council does, what National Marine Fisheries Service does, and then we can react as a group, two councils and a commission, and figure it out.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, another important point to bring up in all of this. I appreciate that. So with that, I think we'll move on, and we do realize that this is an item that there is still a little bit of TBD for us as we come back as a council. So as Jason mentioned, he has everything he needs for this agenda item. So we can move on. I'd like to take a break. And for those of you that may have just joined us after lunch, I know it looks a little late in the day to be handling spiny dogfish, but fear not. We had actually covered the two monkfish agenda items, and we are actually pretty much on time here. So I'd like to take a break. We'll reconvene at 4 PM and we'll take the habitat activities update. Thank you. All right, everyone. We are a little bit past 4, so I'm going to ask everyone to make their way back to the table, please, so we can get through our last couple of agenda items today. The next, I'll give us a little bit of time, hopefully, as I wander through this, Jessica. So as folks are making their way back to the table, I'll introduce the next agenda item and the second to last that we have. So we have the habitat activities update, originally another item that was supposed to be presented by Garfo staff. This time we have Jessica Coakley sitting in for us as council staff to pinch hit. So Jessica, we are past our 4 p.m. start time, so I'll turn it over to you if you're ready to go through this for us.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a big thanks to Karen Green at the Habitat Ecosystem Services Division, because she worked really hard in advance to get me all the notes and information to present on her behalf. So, all right, so HESD typically presents this update twice a year. They actually weren't able to be here last April, so it's been a year since they've come to talk to you about different habitat activities occurring in the Mid-Atlantic region. And we've got a lot of updates to cover. In terms of infrastructure, I'm going to start with the bridges within the region. So the key bridge in the Mid-Atlantic, this is the bridge near Baltimore that unfortunately catastrophically collapsed when it was hit by a barge. The demolition of the old bridge in preparation for work for construction of the new bridge is continuing, and there are plans to drive test piles this fall. There are concerns about the planned explosive demolitions to put those piers in place during the migratory fish closures that are occurring in that area. So HESD staff are working closely with the Federal Highway Administration to seek minimization and mitigation plans as those plans to do that work are further developed. In addition, the Maryland Transit Authority is continuing their Tier 2 National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA process for the new Chesapeake Bay Bridge crossing. This is the bridge that goes from the Eastern Shore over to Annapolis. Some of you know that as the really tall, scary one that just has Jersey barriers or maybe a small barrier to keep you from falling off the top of it. Quite a tall bridge. They are looking to build new bridges there near the current alignment. So a notice of intent to prepare an EIS with proposed alternatives is set to be released this fall. And the National Marine Fisheries Service is a cooperating agency on that process. The Federal Rail Administration is also in the process of establishing a double track along the entire Northeast corridor. There are 2 bridges that are in designated spawning habitat for migratory fish in the Chesapeake Bay, the Susquehanna Rail Bridge and the Long Bridge in DC. So the NIM staff are working to avoid disturbances to these spawning runs and are championing compensatory mitigation projects that are going to benefit migratory fish. Army Corps also is working on an environmental impact statement for a new shipping terminal in the Port of Baltimore, and that final EIS was published to the Federal Register on September 19th, and there is an open comment period for that. I am not sure when that comment period is going to close, and I actually am not sure if you can submit the comments right now, but I'm sure if you are interested in that project, we can get you more detail on that. The Coast Guard is also serving as the lead federal action agency for the replacement and rehab of the fender systems on the Ben Franklin and Walt Whitman bridges right outside of us here in Philadelphia. And staff are conducting early coordination with the applicant, the Delaware River Port Authority, to select a project design to protect and minimize impacts to NOAA Trust resources. Formal consultation has not been initiated, but the consultation folks always say consult early, consult often. So this is part of that early process to get discussions going before the formal process is initiated. And Federal Highway Administration is also overseeing the redesign of roadways in the vicinity of the Pennsylvania Turnpike I-95 interchange. they're looking at the replacement and expansion of that I-95 bridge that goes over the Delaware River. So staff are conducting, again, early coordination with the Federal Highway Administration on that issue. Okay, so moving on to electric cables. On the left-hand side is the Propel New York Energy Project proposal for 2 cable lines. This would be upgraded electrical cables and substations that would enhance New York's electric grid reliability. All the routes that are shown in that left figure are proposed, including 2 routes that cross Long Island Sound. The pink line, which is a 9-mile line, involves in-water disturbance, and submarine construction activities are anticipated to occur within 3 in-water construction sessions, accounting for time of year restrictions in place for fish movement. The EFH consultation is complete and conservation recommendations were provided to this project. And these included those time of year restrictions to reduce impacts to winter flounder and other migratory species, avoiding coastal wetlands, avoiding of shellfish habitat throughout the harbor. And if shellfish impacts are unavoidable, NIMS has actually requested offset mitigation in accordance with recommendations from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. So NIMS would coordinate with New York DEC if a mitigation plan is needed, if appropriate. On the right-hand side is the Transco supply enhancement line. This is a 36.9 total mile loop. There is a new proposed portion of this loop. It's 6 miles and it's shown in red. And it would connect the existing lower lateral piece with the existing lines, which are shown in dashed yellow. NIMS started consulting on this in 2018 and 2019. However, their consultation was recently reinitiated. Aspects of the project were not changed, but they wanted to acknowledge the new EFH designations for highly migratory species in the project area that were not previously reevaluated. So they are reconsulting to include those new designations. And conservation recommendations for the project included time of year, restrictions for dredging and pile driving that affected multiple species, dredging buffers, restoration of temporary impacts to wetlands, and a post-construction monitoring plan, as well as other types of measures. And if anyone has any questions as I go along, please stop me before I jump too far. So port development. There are a number of port development projects ongoing throughout the region. HESD recently completed consultation on the top 3 of these, all in the Delaware River, Port of Salem, New Jersey, Packer Avenue Marine Terminal, and Port Bristol Terminal in Pennsylvania. In Maryland, the U.S. Army Corps also released the final EIS for the Sparrow Point Container Terminal project that's proposed. This is a pretty extensive project. It's a 330-acre site within the Patapsco River in Baltimore County, Maryland. It involves constructing a 3,000-foot marginal wharf, 9 ship-to-shore cranes, a container yard, gate complex, and ultimately it's going to result in about 111 acres of dredging and 4.2 million cubic yards of material that needs to be placed. So in May, the HESD issued their conservation recommendations, and these included seasonal in-water work restrictions to protect migratory fish and compensatory mitigation for habitat loss due to this activity. Wilmington Harbor in North Carolina is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers federal navigation project. They just completed a draft report and draft EIS. Just wanted to let you know that's available online now. The proposed project, the tentative selected plan would involve deepening most of that federal navigation channel in Wilmington Harbor, taking it down an additional 5 feet, and it would also expand the width of several reaches and add an additional reach to the entrance channel. One of the things they have done through this project, the proposed sediment placement from this project would include beneficial use placement areas, beaches, bird islands, intertidal marsh restoration, fish habitat enhancement structures, riverbank protection, and back bay marsh restoration, which is all good to hear. Approximately half of the material dredged for the construction would actually be used for beneficial use rather than being disposed of. And U.S. Army Corps, well, this probably isn't worth mentioning. U.S. Army Corps had an open house scheduled for this evening, and I'm guessing it's probably not happening. But they did have an open house that was scheduled that probably will be rescheduled. Okay, when we were here last, we gave you an update on all of the U.S. Army Corps coastal storm risk management studies that were underway. It's been a year, so there's been more activity and progress on these. So the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributary Studies, or HATS for short, which is occurring in the New York district, they are working and moving forward with their study. Garfo provided comments in August, but indicated to them that because the level of information in their report wasn't sufficient, they could not provide draft. They weren't able to initiate consultation with them formally. They need additional information. So the final report for that HAT study is scheduled to be released in January 2026. So we can keep our eye out for that. Raritan and Sandy Hook Bay study. This project takes place in the New York district, but it's being covered by the Norfolk district. This project is moving forward, and Garfo provided scoping comments to them in July. We don't have a tentative date yet for a final report on that, but specifically Garfo asked that any actions that they propose minimize the effects to NOAA trust resources and coastal ecosystems and prioritize use of non-structural or other land use management options and natural and nature-based solutions. The New York Back Bay studies that's occurring in the Philadelphia district, they're anticipating to see the final report and a chief's report later in 2026. So we can keep our eye out for that. And Norfolk study, which is occurring in that Norfolk region, they also are planning to have some interagency meetings this October. I'm assuming those will be delayed. So once we have additional information on, schedules for that, we can let people know as well. Likewise, there's a City of Virginia Beach Army Corps study, and they were also scheduled to have a number of interagency meetings in the next week or two. So those will probably also be pushed out. But they are expecting a winter 2026 draft report. So the bottom line for most of these is there may be some delays in scheduling for some of these meetings. Most of these final reports were scheduled to come out in early 2026. So they may be slightly delayed, but we'll keep you posted as final reports and links to those become available. Okay, so you previously received a presentation on the HARS, the Historic Area Remediation Site. This EPA project looked at using how to handle additional dredged material from the HARS site. The HARS site is essentially filling up and nearing capacity. So they're looking for other opportunities to move this material. They prepared a document that evaluated some initial alternatives. This is continuing to manage that material within the current HARS boundaries, designating additional impact areas and within a feasible radius that they could use for placement of HARS suitable material, or designating sites within beneficial use siting areas where dredge material could be used to construct fishery habitat enhancements, including areas within and adjacent to the HARS. So I know we sent notices out through the council process for some of the scoping meetings and public hearing meetings they've had. The EPA did receive a number of public comments, and they generally expressed preference that the dredged material disposal options stay within that current HARS footprint and not be expanded out to other use areas, including some of the beneficial use areas that were proposed. All the alternatives are still being considered by the EPA. An offshoot of this project was an eDNA pilot project where they were using eDNA to identify fish species use across the various sites. The U.S. Army Corps ERDC lab and NOAA Milford lab are analyzing that data. And if folks are interested in those eDNA results, we can share those at a later meeting. Okay, I only have 10 slides. I swear I don't have 100. Just letting you know. I'm on number 7. I've got 10. So U.S. Coast Guard fairways and anchorages. So the Coast Guard is in the process of preparing a programmatic EIS for establishing shipping safety fairways and vessel routing measures along the Atlantic coast. So both GARFO and CIRO habitat divisions have been consulting with the U.S. Coast Guard. They started that in 2024 about the establishment of these routes. So there's 18 fairways proposed between the southern border of Massachusetts and Port St. Lucie in Florida. Alternatives under consideration included a northern extension of fairways into the Gulf of Maine and coastal Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine to the U.S.-Canadian border, and then a southern extension from Port Lucie to about Miami, Florida. So those are additional pieces under consideration. Most of these proposed fairway alternatives are more than 3 nautical miles offshore. The only reaches within state waters are at Thatcher Island in Massachusetts and several areas offshore of New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Only minor shifts in vessel traffic are anticipated. So the GARFO HESD staff have consulted with them on this, and with the CIRO staff, they determined that these fairways would not adversely affect the activities proposed. However, there are some existing anchorages that were proposed, and they wanted to see some additional information to help them consult on that component of the project. So the Coast Guard actually provided all of that additional information to them, and no EFH conservation recommendations were needed based upon what U.S. Coast Guard had proposed. So they're continuing to coordinate on this, and the headquarters NOAA Office of Policy is leading coordination with input, as well as their aquaculture coordinator and the Office of Aquaculture and Office of Protected Resources, because there may be some potential effects to fishing activity and aquaculture development. They want to make sure those are all fully considered. Okay, hydropower and FERC. There are a number of dams and hydropower activities going on. There's 3 existing dams in the Delaware River Basin that are under consideration for retrofit with hydropower turbines. For those of you that are familiar with FERC and FERC licensing, these things typically come up every 50, 75, 100 years. So when these opportunities occur to consult, they're really quite important because you might not get another shot in terms of addressing fish habitat issues for 50 years or 100 years. So on the Schuylkill River, which is the largest tributary to the Delaware River, they're looking at a new hydropower facility. It's proposed at the Norristown Dam, which is the 4th dam up from the confluence of the Delaware, and the applicant requested an exemption from FERC licensing. So they're looking at this as their one chance to ensure that if they're going to get any diadromous protections in place there, that they can do it now. So they are consulting on that. Also on the Schuylkill, there is the Black Rock Dam. This is the 5th dam up from the confluence with the Delaware River. It's also being considered for the installation of hydropower turbines. The applicant is currently evaluating the feasibility of the project, so it's not completely clear if this is going to be an original license application or another exemption project. And on the Lehigh River, the 2nd largest tributary to the Delaware, again, hydropower at Chain Dam. And the application is for an original FERC license for a less than 10 megawatt project. Hydropower has been proposed, but this is before those plans have come to fruition. On the Susquehanna River, relicensing is underway for the 2nd and 3rd dams on the mainstream, Wood and Safe Harbor respectively. Interesting, the fishways at these dams have not operated since 2020. And this is because northern snakehead invasive species was first captured in the fishways at the Conowingo Dam. Obviously, the states are very concerned about fishways as mechanisms to spread invasive fish species upstream. And the states have pushed for trap, sort, and haul operations at Conowingo Dam, and no volition passage at the first 3 dams for an undetermined period of time. So GARFO's working through the Susquehanna Anadromous Fish Restoration Cooperative, and they've been working collaboratively with the power companies to identify opportunities to enhance long-term restoration and passage for these species while still addressing the state's concerns about invasive species. So there's not a real clear answer at this point to what's going to happen, but there's hope that this coordination will achieve some sort of consensus moving forward on all of those dams. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers nationwide permits, those were recently issued. There was a Federal Register notice that proposed rulemaking to reissue 56 of the existing nationwide permits, and any associated general conditions and definitions that go along with each of those permits. The reissuance of this occurs every 5 years. And for those that aren't familiar, the concurrence and the issuance of these nationwide permits avoids the need to undertake hundreds of project-specific consultations in the Mid-Atlantic each year. So if certain conditions are met by projects and they fall into the specific categories under these nationwide permits, then they're not required to do a separate consultation process with NOAA. So through this process, I just lost my place in my notes. HESD. Okay, so they were looking at 48 of these 56 nationwide permits to be issued. However, there are project-specific consultations that would be required for 7 of these specific nationwide permit types that are being proposed. So I've got a lot more detail here on the nationwide permits and the specifics of all these different types. So if you're interested in those, please reach out and we can provide additional detail. Okay, efforts to enhance consultation efficiency. During June and July, GARFO, HESD, and the Protected Resources Division both collaborated to host 2 Essential Fish Habitat Endangered Species Act consultation webinars. They engaged 160 staff from all 5 districts within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers District, the North Atlantic District, as well as representatives from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the webinars provided a comprehensive overview of Magnuson-Stevens Act fishery conservation and management and Endangered Species Act, highlighting their ecological and economic importance. And they view this webinar as an opportunity to strengthen the consultation relationships with those partners, and develop those working relationships so they can work better on these conservation recommendations and other aspects of the consultation process. So they're planning to host some of these quarterly webinars going forward on a multitude of more detailed topics based on their essential fish habitat assessment worksheets. And they're planning to record those and provide those to groups and entities that are interested in them. So, and as a direct follow-up, both HESD and the Protected Resources Division are now launching joint monthly office hours for U.S. Army Corps staff throughout the region to ensure they get that early and often coordination support for their processes. Okay. So environmental consultation organizers, ECO. So in this past year, they've made a number of improvements to ECO. The ecosystem is used by both the Essential Fish Habitat consultation process staff and the Endangered Species Act consultation staff as a repository for all of their work. I know we've talked a lot about all of the consultations that occur, but those can all be accessed within ECO, so public users can search for specific consultations or consultation types. There's two levels of access. There's a public level of access, so any council member or member of the public can access ECO and pull up those letters or those biological opinions. And then there's a login level for NOAA personnel, and for council staff. The Habitat staff also have access to ECO, so we can go ahead and log in and access all of that information. So we wanted you to be aware that that site's been updated and that's got that public facing piece that's available for everyone. And last slide, and this came up very last minute, but HESD had a project, a proposal reach out for an offshore aquaculture project. It was with Newport Mussels. So they are actually looking to have a project that covers 2,300 acres in federal waters off southern New England, about 17 miles southeast of Newport, Rhode Island, and 8 miles west of Martha's Vineyard. They're proposing to grow blue mussels in a typical New Zealand style. And I'm trying to remember what the New Zealand style is, but if you're interested in that, we can get you some information on what that actually is. I think that's where they have like long chains that come down and it dangles, but we can get you some pictures of that and figure that out. But they're proposing to grow those mussels. This is not a formal consultation at this phase. They are just reaching out to the Habitat and Ecosystem Services staff to get those discussions going. And they did present this project to the New England Habitat PDT in early September. And we can keep you updated on this as that project moves forward. And with that, this is my best substitute for Karen Green. She also is from New Jersey originally, so we both talk relatively fast and quick. So hopefully I was a good enough fill-in for that. But I do have more detailed information from her if folks have if you'd like more information about any of these individual projects or links to some of those sites. And I'm sure if you want to dig into more detail when she gets back, Karen would be happy to help you out with acquiring any additional information.
Thank you, Jessica. That was an excellent pinch hitting there. So let's do this. And we've done this with some other agenda items as well, where council staff was pinch hitting. I will look to the council if there are any questions, noting that council staff may not be able to answer, but to give them a chance to get it on record. As for the public, I will ask them, we won't go out to the public for questions right now, but if they need help, since this was such a broad array of groups within the federal agencies, that they could look to us to see who to direct questions to within the federal agencies. That's what we'll do for the public. But any questions amongst the council? I see Jim Gilmore's hand.
Thanks, Chairman. Jess, and I'm sure this is going to be a follow-up question, but from the presentation, it looks like we've got this rosy relationship with the Army Corps, but from history, that really hasn't been very good. Well, and I'm looking from 10 years back, whatever. I'm just wondering if it has improved because, especially when it comes to fish habitat, there's a lot of things and examples we could cite. And the most recent one, or 10 years ago, was Hurricane Sandy, when we got 3 breaches on the South Shore of Long Island. And we desperately wanted to keep them open because of improvements to fish habitat. And we were only successful in keeping one open, which was because it was National Park Service property. So they overruled them. And when we left this open, we got alewife runs back. We had water quality improvements like you had never seen before, hard clam sets. The whole ecosystem came back locally in a few years. But the Army Corps was very much, hey, if we get an inch of water on the mainland increase from what we had in the past, we're not interested in fixing habitat. We have to protect the public. So I would like to follow up. Is there an improvement that we have so much effort on fish habitat in general and essential fish habitat? Is there a change in the Army Corps' stance on some of that? Because when they finally finished after Sandy was over, it's called the Fire Island to Montauk Restoration Project. they decided to close every inlet that will ever occur on the South Shore of Long Island, regardless of what's going on with the water quality. And it just seems to be, how could we have one federal agency saying we want to improve fish habitat and another one's doing a lot of efforts to like really thwart that effort? So I would like to have some follow-up with them at, when they get back on the job. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation. I think you went over 10 slides, possibly, at least the page numbers said 12. No, you got my interest really quick about the New Zealand style mussel farming. And I had to go look it up just to see what they're talking about, which is basically attaching droppers hanging from surface ropes supported by buoys. Considering where they're looking at locating that, I guess there might be some protected species concerns, like maybe the right whale, where we're already having little issues with buoy lines and such. Has that been brought up?
It hasn't been brought up to me directly yet, but this just very recently came up as this presentation was being prepared. So we could follow up with that. I know they're talking to HESD, but Protected Resources may be interested in this project as well. So I'm sure there's other divisions in Garfo that are going to be paying attention to this as, aquaculture types of activities come up. But again, this is early consult. It's not like a formal initiated consult yet, at least on the habitat piece.
Thank you. Any other hands around the table? I apologize for the delay there. I did see something in the chat from Michelle. Okay. Thank you to Michelle Bachman with New England Council staff. So she had a note that the slide deck, this slide deck is the Newport mussels provided to her, the Habitat Committee, and she has a link to the New England Council's PDT Newport mussel there. So I think that covers it. I don't see any other hands from council on this. So again, thank you, Jessica, for a very comprehensive update there. We can move on, I believe, to our last agenda item, which is the Atlantic Coast Regional Fisheries Compensation Program that the council has been getting updates on fairly regularly. Some of those have been provided by none other than yours truly, and I'll continue to apologize for that. Today, we have the Carbon Trust here with us, who I'm sure will do a much better job than I have in the past. So I'm going to turn it over to Olivia and Jan, if you can please introduce yourselves and give an update again to something I think the council is pretty familiar with, and glad to have you here. Thank you both.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak, and especially at the end of a day. So I'm sure that you've had lots to discuss today. So I'm Olivia Burke. I'm from the Carbon Trust. I know some of you, lots of you are new to me. Maybe Jan, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jan Mattis, and I'm working very closely with Olivia on the stakeholder engagement on this particular program. Very nice meeting you all.
So really, what we wanted to do, we're aware that some of you might be more acquainted with this project than others. I think, Joe, you've mentioned some more information has already been circulated in the past, but we wanted to give a bit of an update of what this is looking at. So this regional approach to a compensation framework for fisheries for future offshore wind development. We wanted to also provide some updates on some of the recent conversations and work that has been happening over the last couple of months, and also as a way to highlight sort of how people can get involved with this process over the next couple of weeks, months, so that as a way to get involved, but also to provide that input and where you can see some of the updates that are coming through. So maybe as a starting point, just so that everybody's aware of the different organisations and people, because there's quite a lot of people that are involved within this process. I'll just reflect on this slide. I won't go through it in too much detail. So we're from the Carbon Trust. The Carbon Trust, to be clear, is not an offshore wind developer. It's a question we quite often get, so I'll just address that directly up front. We're really part of this to look at stakeholder engagement. So how do we get different people around the table? How do we get the right questions flowing and the information coming back, and how to provide that into the wider group, which is consisting of states, developers, and representatives from various different fisheries up and down the coast. We're working with an organisation called Brown Greer. They're the lead in this whole work. So they're a claims firm based in Virginia. They have a lot of experience developing these compensation frameworks, but they aren't doing the day-to-day stakeholder engagement part of this. Alongside Carbon Trust, we're working with two independent consultants, Deirdre Bulk and Laura Singer, who some of you may know, to really help drive engagement within the fishery sector, and two organisations. And one of the organisations is the Consensus Building Institute, Pat Fields there, and Chris Ola from the Special Initiative in Offshore Wind. Both of those organisations have been very involved in the discussions to date over many years, actually. So it's quite a large team looking at this from lots of different angles in various different states. So very briefly on the background, and then we'll get more into the discussion about what the project's doing now and into the future. So how this came about was that several years ago now, so you can see it's 2021, there was BOEM started to work with various different states, along with NOAA as well, to look at what could a regional compensation framework look like as new wind farms and the first wind farms came on site in the US. There were discussions on individual compensation packages. That's something that has continued to operate, but that isn't a particularly efficient way of doing things, both in terms of the administration to get things going, but also in terms of having complexities around the engagement part of it. So coming to the table on this, the discussion evolved into how can we make it as easy as possible for fishermen that are operating potentially across different states, between different lease areas, who may need to have different approaches to applying, whether that's eligibility or data, but also from the actual administration side. How do we limit the costs in terms of making sure that the money that is available goes to the fishermen and the fishery sector, rather than looking at how on each individual compensation framework we'd have to look at the administration side. So that's been a discussion that's been happening over some time, with really the launch of this in February 2024. And NYSERDA was the lead state, so they were helping bring together lots of different states behind the scenes to look at, actually, let's have a request for proposal on how we could do that. And that's how Carbon Trust and Brown Greer became involved in this work. Since then, we had a relatively slow start from the end of last year for the first sort of 6 months or so, setting up various different committees and looking at how can we put this information out there. And since then, we've really been focusing on the input part of it, and we can go through that in more detail in a minute. And then on this slide, we just wanted to pause briefly. We have a website up and running with more information that has links to the meetings that are available, and also meeting summaries and various different resources on that. So that's the rfainfo.com. And we also have I think it's about a 4-page document, which has frequently asked questions on that. And that has become a very useful resource that we like to direct people to give a little bit more about the background to this project, but also what the bounds are around this work. Because this work is focused on looking at financial compensation to address the potential economic losses from offshore wind development. But that's also looking at future wind farms. So a question we often get is about the existing compensation funds. What will happen to that? There's no expectation that they would be changed. It's more about potentially, if more wind farms are built in the future, how would this framework be applied to different wind farms? We also often talk about an overall mitigation hierarchy. So compensation is a sort of final point on that. And you have above that avoidance, minimization, mitigation, and then compensation. And that's really important because that's not saying that compensation is a easy way out of people's obligations about potential impact on fisheries. What it's saying is that it's one step of many others, and that should be the final point in that hierarchy. We also wanted to highlight on this that it's really developing a framework for how money is distributed out of the program. So a question again, which often comes up is, how about the money in? And that's a really important question, because when you're looking at the money out, to understand how much money coming into a program is really important. However, that is a question that is outside of the scope of this work. And because that is a very complex question, which depends on lots of different factors, including state negotiations on individual projects, and also variable timelines of when offshore wind projects may come on board. So that's a question that the group as a whole is considering, but there isn't a fixed answer on how that will be calculated. So really all of this is about, once the money is there, how does it get distributed out in an equitable way?
Yeah, and one of the initial task really was to look at some guiding principles and developing some guiding principles. And there's still work in progress. So you can see on the slide here, it's a working draft, but we thought it would be useful to highlight some of them to you here. And the first one is really consistent. So we want to develop consistent means to apply for compensation, and that is consistent across different states, consistency across different wind farms. So that's very important. Also, it needs to be a fair process and transparent. It needs to be clearly explained what the methods are, what the process is, what the requirements are. And it should compensate for the impact that the fishing industry experienced from offshore wind farm development and also operation. And it needs to be efficient. So it should limit the burden for all relevant parties. That also means it should be easy for participants to apply for the process. And it also should discourage manipulation. So it also needs to be based on evidence that ensures fairness. And it should reinforce the incentive to keep fishing. So we don't want to pay out money to basically stop fishing activities. So as I said, this is a process that's still in development, but we're nearly finalizing this. I want to expand a little bit around stakeholder engagement and how the structure of the compensation fund is. So we are engaging with 3 different stakeholder groups. On one side with offshore wind farm developers, with states, but then also with the fishing industry. And that is divided into commercial fishing, but then also for hire recreational fishing. And then we are engaging through 3 different levels, you could say. On one side, we have one-to-one meetings at ports. We are having small group meetings up and down the coast. We are presenting to groups like we do today to you here. So that is one level of engagement. Then we have caucus meetings, and you can see them on the slide here. There's a caucus meeting for the for-hire fishery sector, the commercial fishing sector, offshore wind farm developers, and then also states. And they are meeting around one time a month, roughly, and discussing different design components that will form part of the compensation fund. And then we have the Design Oversight Committee, the DOC, and a very similar group for the for-hire sector as well. And this DOC brings together the different caucuses to discuss the design components and trying to achieve consensus in terms of different design components. And we recently had a meeting, and they're meeting roughly every 2 to 3 months in general. So that's how we are structured and how we are managing the stakeholder engagement. And this slide here is really for more for your reference. You can see the members of the Design Oversight Committee, but also for the For-Hire Committee. You probably know some of them. Some of them are actually in the room here. So yeah, that is it's more for your reference, and the aim of this individuals is really to drive consensus across the different caucus activity.
So maybe a little bit more information on the activities that the group have been up to, or the groups have been up to recently, and where we're looking to move to over the next couple of months. So you can see that sort of the August and November areas, the part highlighted in green there, the big questions that the group have been looking at has been around consultation on eligibility and valuation. And for that, some of the questions that we've been picking up on have been around things like, from when and how far back should a program look for a fisherman's history? So if you're trying to demonstrate eligibility, and this will depend on various fisheries and states, different people have different views based on where their background, how can we really determine what eligibility looks like? And that has been a big, complex question, and the group is still working through that. But for that is also something that we're looking at. Should there be some specific conversations on specific fisheries where there are differences in historical movement, for example? So that's still ongoing, but that's a really important topic that the group is looking into as a whole. And the caucus groups are meeting over the next probably 2 months quite regularly to discuss that in more detail. The other part of that is really looking at the types of losses and how to pay for that. And so that's also looking at things like what should be included. So if there's a wind farm there and a fisherman has to go around the wind farm because there's either a closure or potentially that there's not confidence in navigating it through the wind farm, and that's a separate question anyway, but that could have an impact on fuel use. So is fuel something that can be compensated for? Another question that quite often comes up is about insurance. So does the cost of insurance on vessels increase? Should that be compensated? And how is that determined? So these are sort of some of the questions that are coming up, and we're having conversations in these smaller groups, providing this feedback to the different caucuses, who are then developing it more into proposals and then running it through on the DOC side. We also have a couple of subgroups that are running, so on topics that have proven to be more complex, and we haven't got updates on those at the moment. I think only the first meetings have only just met. So one is on shoreside businesses. So how should shoreside businesses be included within this? And one is looking at what we're calling transferability of permits. And as part of that will also look at the continuation of fishing and the impact on new entrants into the industry. That's a real concern that we're hearing, and how to make sure that that part of it is considered. In terms of the next steps, so this is really like the core part of the work that's happening at the moment. What we hope to have on the table is by early next year, sort of end of January, February time, some more information about some of these areas, so more about a worked approach to how it could look like. We're working on some of these in the background, and we're talking through ideas in these small group meetings and in the caucus meetings, the DOC meetings, but there's not a uniform approach yet. But we've heard that it would be useful to have something on paper so that people have a better idea of what that could look like and can react to it before anything is finalized. So that's what we want to do early next year. And then the aim would be to have something that is in a relative finalized position, and that's a framework by June. So that's not looking at implementation, but it's how it could be used into the future. And then the final thing I want to note on that is that this is guidance. It's not mandated that it is used. We have developers and states involved in the process that would like it to work. There's an interest to make this succeed, but there's not a mandate to use it. So individual future projects could still have their own funds. That's not the expectation, but just to be clear on that. So that's really the sort of key parts on what we're working on at the moment.
Yeah, maybe to give you a little bit of an example of one of the topics that we are working on. is a multi-track approach. So one of the objectives is to make it accessible, to limit the burden of application and to increase efficiency. So what we are thinking is to create a multi-track approach where one path of this may allow applicant to receive payment without documenting the individual loss or impact. So as long as you are eligible, you would receive a certain amount of payment without actually proving the impact or the loss that you may have received or experienced. And then there could be a second path where fishermen may then document their impact or their loss, and then based on this documentation receive a certain amount of compensation. And that compensation may be higher than the first pass, but also has a higher burden, basically. So that gives you an idea about one of the sort of areas that is currently under discussions with the Design Oversight Committee and also discussions that we are having. But hopefully will make the overall process more acceptable and also more efficient.
And final slide is just to highlight again that the website has a lot of information on it. It has bios about the DOC members that we had on the slide earlier, and also anybody can reach out to that contact at rfainfo.com. There's quite a lot of information that's going up there and increasingly more documents, so please do reach out. And any of the DOC members can be contacted as well, and we're seeing a lot more engagement through that process as well, including some DOC members coming to small group meetings and sort of providing as another link forward. So you can talk to us, you can talk to any of the people we mentioned, but also the DOC members. And I think that's everything from us.
Okay, thank you both so much. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this has been ongoing for some time, and the council and the commission as well have been getting updates throughout. There's a lot to this, and just looking around the table, as Olivia and Jan, you both know that there's varying levels of participation even amongst council members, let alone interested members of the public. So I very much appreciate the update here. I will look around the table to see if there are any questions or comments from council members. Jim Gilmore?
Some of this sounds very familiar to what we went through, each one of the states with the CARES Act through the federal government. And I think each one of the states came up with a different way of, or maybe some different ways of documenting loss. And I remember one of the challenging parts of it was that if you really wanted them to document their loss, the amount of work to do that was rather daunting. So we got into a system of, they had to put affidavits up to document that loss because we couldn't track it. So just a suggestion, I mean, there was a lot of effort that went on in each state under that CARES Act that may overlap into this, that may help you guys out. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Any other hands amongst council members? Okay, I'm not seeing any. We do have a contact information up on the screen from Carbon Trust. And again, this is multifaceted. There's a lot of folks involved. The RFA info page and the frequently asked questions, I think, are going to be very helpful. So since we are up against time, I will say to the public, instead of asking for questions from the public right now, to use that contact information. If you're not able to grab that quickly, you can reach out to the council staff and we'll make sure that we'll point you in the right direction there. So once again, thank you all for that. And so with that, we've reached the end of our agenda items. I think Chris might have a message for us, so I'll turn it over to Chris. And thank you, Jan and Olivia, once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will have hospitality again this evening. It's in room 227. So everyone's invited. The problem is that if you don't have a card for this hotel, you don't have a room in the hotel, it's tough to get up to 227. So I see members of the public back there. Everyone's invited. If you're interested in going to hospitality, find a buddy with a key or talk to one of the staff members and they'll escort you up to 227. Okay, so 227, hospitality starts now. Yes, Scott.
Dr. Moore, I just wanted to mention that if you're coming from your rooms upstairs, the elevator in the back of the building, you don't need the key to get to floor 2.
But if you're a member of the public trying
If you're a
to get up,
member of the public trying to get up, you do, yes.
you're going to need a key. Okay, all right, so see everyone there. Thank you.